There's the big bender. That's what makes Thompson so good, but it starts with fastball command. And he takes strike 3. 4 punch-outs here in 2023. But if Zack keeps doing that, man, oh man, he's staking a claim today with his 6th strikeout. He's gotten Jones, a good hitter, twice.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. That's what it sounded like on Bally Sports Midwest yesterday as Zack Thompson, with 8 Ks in his name, goes out there and shoves for your St. Louis Cardinals. Alex, I got to be honest with you, didn't see that one coming. When they announced that Zack Thompson was going to be starting for the Cardinals yesterday, my immediate reaction was, oof, because he had been horrible, and I mean horrible, this year down in the minor leagues. In his opportunities as a starter, he had an ERA of 9. He had he was giving up a ton of hard contact. He was walking the world. He basically gave up an average of a run per inning, and he walked more than one batter, Alex, per inning pitch down in the minor league. So I didn't have high expectations of him yesterday. And then he went out there and he looked great. The slider was a really good pitch for him. This is a new one that he's working on. The curveball was as good as we've seen it from him. Fastball velo was good. It was something worth dreaming about. And we talked about it last year. I thought Zack Thompson was one of their better relievers all of last season. Alex, are you talking yourself into Zack Thompson getting another opportunity down the stretch as a starter in the big leagues?
Yeah, why not? I mean, why wouldn't you want to see more of that to see if this is reality or if this is just fake? Because, frankly, you don't really have a lot of options in terms of depth that you've seen. We haven't gotten to the Graceffos and the McGreevies, but the other ones are Hudson and Liberatore, and Hudson was good. You want to see that one again. Liberatore had a good first inning, and then after that, it kind of went downhill. I don't understand why you wouldn't want to see this again from Zack Thompson. Yeah, the numbers are ugly as all hell in Memphis, but this is the only start that he's gotten this season, and it was an impressive one. The 3 starts that he had last year for the Cardinals, 2 of the 3 were impressive. Now, there were only 3 innings or 4 innings, but it was still impressive. He's obviously shown, especially yesterday, that he's got swing and miss stuff. What does Ollie want in his rotation? Swing and miss stuff. So, yeah, I could talk myself into it. I think they should give him more options down the stretch because what else do you have to lose?
That's where I am, too, is I do want to see more from Thompson as a starter to end the year because, again, he got nothing to lose, and I think he deserves an opportunity after going out there and shoving for 4 innings yesterday and having that swing and miss stuff. And though he struggled in the minor leagues, the way I look at that was, yes, he had his struggles, but clearly he was working on something. And if it was this slider that is new to his repertoire, and this is a pitch that is for real, which looked really good yesterday, generated 5 swing and misses, then maybe he's a different pitcher and can be a starter because you need more than just 2 pitches if you're going to be a starter. You can't have a fastball, curveball, and go, all right, I'm going to go out there and give you 5-6 innings. You need multiple pitches. So because he looked good yesterday, I'm open to giving him more opportunities. I'm open to seeing if the slider was real, if he can do that again against a legitimate offense. Colorado, look, great. You did your job. Let's just be honest, that team stinks, kind of like you. But I think that you need to give Thompson another shot because he proved at least he had swing and miss stuff, and I want to see how it plays against another team when he's going up against someone that's a legitimate competition.
I'm fine with it. Like the rest of this year, if you want to see what he's got as a starter, cool. No harm, no foul. Do I think this is something that should be even in the plans for next season? No, I really don't, guys. And I hate to be the one that comes on here like, it's kind of similar to what I felt about the Dakota Hudson conversation. Did Dakota Hudson have a really nice start for the Cardinals? Yes. Did he earn himself another opportunity to start for this team? Sure. Do I think that should work him into the plans for 2024? No. We cannot do this again. We can't keep letting them getting away with this.
We've never done this before.
No, never. We've never fallen into a small sample size trap where we believed that somebody was capable of more than what they actually are.
Who are you thinking of?
It's never happened before in this market, or any market for that matter. Man, I grew up as a Royals fan, where the only hope that you had as a fan was watching guys after they fell out of contention, after the trade deadline in August and September, go out there and just look amazing. Because there's no pressure. There's no pressure whatsoever. So these guys start playing a little better because they start playing freer, and then you see them again in April, and you're like, oh, yeah. That was the guy that I hated the first 3 months of the season. So I'm not telling you shouldn't be excited about Zack Thompson. You should be as a bullpen piece. If they come into next year and he's like the 8th starter, 9th starter in your rotation plans, and he's a guy that you can expect to go 2, maybe even 3 innings out of the bullpen, and you've upgraded that long arm, like if he takes the Drew Verhagen spot in your bullpen next year, you're probably better because he's a better pitcher than Drew Verhagen is, in my opinion. But if he is one of the 5 planned starters going into the season, something has gone horribly awry with your offseason plans. And I mean horribly awry. So sure, start him every 5th day the rest of the way. I don't care. This season's over. It doesn't really matter. Find out what you've got in this young guy.
I understand what you're saying of not putting him.
He cannot be a part of your plans next year, but not in the rotation.
But he can be somebody who is someone who steps in when an injury takes place or when somebody
like the
falters.
3rd or 4th guy, sure.
How can he be the 3rd or 4th guy when he just got 8 strikeouts?
Because we've seen this, man. I'm not falling into one game samples.
But you haven't, though. You've only seen 3 starts at the major league level.
Just saw in the minor leagues he was one of the worst starters in AAA. In his 8 starts that he made, he went a total of 34 innings, walked more than a batter per inning, had an ERA of 8.7. The only pitchers in the AAA that have been worse than he was as a starter were Jeff Criswell for the Colorado Rockies.
He's pitching at altitude, that poor guy.
And Connor Pilkington. He pitches for Cleveland and in 63 innings has a 9 ERA. That's it. Those 2 guys.
Okay,
he has been worse in the minors this year than Adam Wainwright has been in the majors.
But that's AAA.
And we all want.
But that's AAA.
Yeah, you think that it's going to get easier in the majors, man?
It worked yesterday, didn't it?
I mean, he was facing a AAA
lineups in all of baseball.
So why not give that opportunities 4 more times, and then at the end of the season,
I just told you I'm cool with it.
But if at the end of the season, it looks good, and you're just going to say, "Yeah, screw you, though. You're not going to be a part of this.
Yes.
You be ace." Nah, you can't do that, man.
I'm not handing anything to anybody
You're not
anymore.
handing
You
it to him.
Earn it.
He could be in the competition in spring training.
Sure, he's one of the 5 guys that's competing for that 5th spot, and if he wins it, something has gone wrong. Steven Matz is better right now as a starting pitcher than Zack Thompson. He just is. I'm sorry, guys. We've all watched these players. Guess which one is better? It's Steven Matz. I know everybody hated him for 4 months. I did too. But Steven Matz is a better major league starter right now than Zack Thompson. There's nothing wrong with that, man. Maybe Zack Thompson 2 or 3 years from now, he starts working his way into your rotation plans. But right now, the guy is not somebody that you can trust as a starter. He's just not. I guess maybe I am a little surprised that there's more optimism coming off of 1 start.
It's not optimism. You've just been trash in terms of developing your pitchers. So
Correct.
why all of a sudden, after a guy who's gotten 4 starts at the majors, yeah, he's been bad in the minors, but why after 4 starts at the majors over 2 years, you say, nope, not going to happen?
Because we've seen it at the minor league level.
And I think this is the conversation. I think it's more so about getting better from. I think the plan right now is if you're trying to view Thompson as the number 5, it means you upgraded only 2 spots in your rotation.
By no means am I arguing this guy should be number 5 going into next season.
I think where he's competing is in terms of where he's going to land on the depth chart for next year, in terms of where he is as a starter. Sure. And I think the best plan, and I think BK said this, is he comes into spring training stretched out. Say he wins, he ends up being like 8th on your depth chart. He falls behind Libby and
that's where he was this
McGreevy.
year.
Yeah. And he goes into your pen and he takes whether it's the Verhagen role or the Plante role, where he ends up being a guy that's in the bullpen, can go multiple innings, and if dire need ends up starting a game or 2 because he's stretched out a little bit. That's the role he should be in. I think right now, though I was encouraged by his start, I do want to see him more just to see how everything translates. Right now, he's pitching more for determining where he's going to rank in terms of on the depth chart going into spring training. They still need to upgrade outside the rotation. I don't even think they need a competition for this 5 spot because they should be upgrading it via free agency or trade. I think Matt should be the 5. You upgrade at 4, and you go out and get in 1 and 2.
Alex, the reason why I'm saying that they can't do this again next year is because we've seen them do this elsewhere. Same conversation we've had about the Blues, and why this is maybe why I'm surprised by your take on this, is because when we talk about this with the Blues, we talk about getting an established player for spots so that way a young player is not expected to be more than what they're capable of. For Zack Thompson going into next year, the expectation should be you are the 6th or 7th arm in our bullpen. If you don't have 5 arms that are better than Thompson, more consistent than Thompson coming out of your bullpen isn't good enough. And the same thing should be true of your rotation. Going into next year, you need a new number 1. You need a new number 2. Miles Michaelis should be your number 3. You probably need a new number 4, and then Steven Matz is your number 5. However we think 6 through 10 is on the depth chart, I would hope that you have improved your depth so much right now down in the minors, and you have improved the starting rotation by the start of next season so much that Thompson is barely even in the conversation. That should be the goal this offseason, is that Zack Thompson, while exciting and fun and young and having prospect pedigree previously, he is so far down the depth chart that it's not even really a legitimate conversation in spring training that he's competing for a spot, because we all know how it's going to end up going. He comes in, he's stretched out, he gets a couple of starts in the spring, maybe even on the backfield, and then by the start of the regular season, he's written in pen into the bullpen, and he gets a bunch of opportunities as a long man or in some potential high leverage spots whenever your best guys are down for the day. That should be Zack Thompson's role. I don't even think that I'm being negative here. I know it sounds that way because I'm more negative than the two of you are. I'm actually really optimistic about Zack Thompson. I think what we saw yesterday was super encouraging. And if he is able to develop another breaking ball, man, that's awesome. And whether that means that next year by midseason, if they have a bunch of injuries, he can come in and fill a spot start or two, that's a really valuable commodity to have. But I am not expecting, honestly, I'm not even asking Zack Thompson to be that, because you have other players that should be able to step up that way because of what we're asking and honestly demanding of John Mozeliak going into this offseason.
But who are those other players you're expecting to step up?
Next year?
Yeah.
They're not on the Cardinals right now.
Well, but that's my only concern with this right now, and here's where I'm at. I agree wholeheartedly that they 1 through 5 should not be Zack Thompson, but you were terrible at depth this year with your pitching that could step in when something happened. Awful at it. And now you didn't develop those guys properly. Zack Thompson was in your bullpen, and then he went back to being a starter, and then was back for a little bit, didn't use them, and then went back down, and then is back, and now he's getting this opportunity. You've been terrible at developing this. Why not let this next year look at it and say, you know what? When something happens, because we know it's going to happen with the 1 through 5 in our rotation, Zack Thompson's ready to go and get that opportunity.
Because I think you should have better options. Like Gordon Graceffo, Michael McGreevy, Matthew Liberatore all have shown better production.
Roby, potentially.
At some point, production has to matter, guys. Like, I have to see you do it before I can just say, here, take this opportunity.
But he did it yesterday.
Yeah, and these other guys have done it 20 times in the minors better than Zack Thompson has. In fact, a lot of those guys did what Zack Thompson did yesterday in the minors multiple times. So those guys have earned it more than Zack Thompson has. Thompson has earned the right to be a bullpen arm so far. Now, if he does this every single time that he goes out there and starts, and he just completely changes everybody's opinion of him as a starter, okay, but there's no reason for me to believe that's going to be the case until we see it. So right now, my current opinion with the information that we have available to us, Zack Thompson should be lower. In fact, I would rather, and I know nobody wants to hear this, I would rather see McGreevy get the next start over Zack Thompson, because I think McGreevy is more likely to factor into your rotation plans next year than Zack Thompson is. I would rather continue seeing Matthew Liberatore. I might even be okay with seeing one of the other young guys that's currently down in AAA that has had success. I know Graceffo had a really bad start over the weekend, so maybe you don't want to throw him into that mix, but I think that he's so far down the list of the pecking order for guys right now that he's not really even in my conversation of starters.
Yeah, I still want to see him start, because I think, to what Alex was saying, I think if he starts and gets continuous starts and makes, 5-6 more good starts by the end of the year, I think you can then potentially go in the year and say he's going to be a starter for us in the minor leagues, and we continue to develop him. But it all relies on that third breaking ball. Sure, we've known he has a fastball. We've known he has a curveball. The difference between him being a reliever and a starter is if he has a slider that works. And yesterday, the slider worked. And that's why I want to see him for the rest of the year, and then have the conversation again by the end of the year and go, okay, where's he at? Because if his slider works and he pitches as good as he did yesterday and is able to build up to 5-6 innings, okay, then we can start about, okay, let's reassess in the offseason. Let's send him down. Let's have him stretch out, be a starter in the minor leagues for us. But if that slider doesn't come to, and that was just a one-off, and yesterday was just one of those days where you're feeling it and he feels good for 4 innings, then he is a bullpen arm. You don't even have to worry about penciling him as a starter. You know he's not a starter. If the slider's not there, he is not a starter. He's a bullpen arm.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Somebody on the text line said, guys, but we haven't seen this from Matthew Liberatore. He showed it in the minors, but he's never shown this in the big leagues. Not true, sir or madam. Against the Milwaukee Brewers earlier this year, Matthew Liberatore threw 5 innings, struck out 6, 0 earned runs, and after that, he became the same Matthew Liberatore that we've seen previously.
Right, so both have done it once.
Matthew Liberatore, as a starter in the big leagues, has been more successful than Zack Thompson as a starter in the big leagues. Zack Thompson has a 6 ERA so far in his big league career as a starter. I'm not saying he's a bad pitcher, guys. It's okay to just reel it in a little bit on the expectations for some of these guys. I would not go into next season with him in my plans in any way, shape, or form as a starting pitcher for the Cardinals, but I understand I am certainly the lowest one of the 3 of us in the room, and apparently among our text line as well on Zack Thompson. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, guys, that Eli Drinkwitz said something interesting over the weekend, and I think he was right about this. We'll get into that coming up in about 15 minutes or so. Alex will continue getting mad at me next here on 101 ESPN.
Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
I think Snell is actually a good name for them because I think he'll be attainable. He won't cost necessarily the very top of the market. I would assume that Aaron Nola and maybe Julio Urias are the top of the market. And then you've got Giolito and Snell, probably the next two. And if you can get Snell to a Gossman-type contract, I think I'd be into it.
There was a good piece earlier today on ESPN.com breaking down the free agency market alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. That was Eno Saris of The Athletic on with us on Friday, talking about why he thinks Blake Snell could be the pitcher that ends up making the most sense for the Cardinals in free agency. Alex, you know, I've always liked Blake Snell a lot. I was talking about him last year when we were considering, hey, what could the Cardinals maybe do at the deadline? At the time, Blake Snell was really struggling, and then he turned it on in a big way down the stretch. This season, he got off to a little bit of a sluggish start, but has been amazing basically since the start of May. Had a 3.8 ERA in May, and then continued with a 0.8 ERA in July, and then a 0.6 ERA in the month of August. He's been just unhittable for the vast majority of the last 3 months of the season. Alex, in this piece over on ESPN.com, they wrote about what the projected contracts could be for some of the top players on the market. For Blake Snell, they said the comparable pitchers are Patrick Corbin, Carlos Rodon, Robbie Ray. They mentioned for Aaron Nola, they expect him to do better than the Kevin Gossman deal, which was 5 years and $110 million. They mentioned the same contract for Lucas Giolito. So you've got some guys that are in that 5 or 6 year range at $25-ish million per year is kind of what you're talking about at the top end of the market. Snell, Giolito, and Nola are the three names that we've probably talked about the most often going into the offseason. All three have legit upside, and all three have some level of success in their history as well. I think whoever the Cardinals choose out of that trio, if they end up going that direction of the top of the market pitching, it's going to tell us not only a lot about what their season's going to be in 2024, but it will also tell us a lot about what the Cardinals are valuing in their starting pitching moving forward. Because this is them speaking with their actions and not their words. They've talked a lot about swing and miss stuff and what they want to bet on in the future. Well, if that is truly the thing that you prioritize the most, Blake Snell should be your answer. He has the best strikeout rate by a wide margin of Giolito, and Aaron Nola. But he has walk issues. He doesn't get as deep into games. And so if you worry more about, hey, we need a guy that's going to go every fifth day and he's going to get through 6 innings. Well, Aaron Nola's your guy. He is a classic Cardinals pitcher. He's big, strong, right-handed, doesn't have crazy velocity. The swing and miss is not what it once was, but he's a really good starter that you can count on. Miles Michaelis plus is what you can call him. And then there's Lucas Giolito. And if you want to keep living on that Jack Flaherty dream, boy, let me introduce you to his high school teammate, Lucas Giolito, who's been pretty good, has shown some real reasons for optimism, but has never lived up to the billing of a legitimate number one. He probably slots in best right now as a number 3 starter in a contending rotation. Maybe you could talk yourself into a number 2, but he's got the upside of being a number 1. So all 3 of those directions are very different routes. Alex, if you were in Mo's shoes and you said, all right, all 3 of them are willing to accept a 5 to 6 year deal worth $25 million per year, where would you place your bet? Which profile do you think is best for what the Cardinals need?
I would place it on Aaron Nola, but I wouldn't be upset if they did Blake Snell. Lucas Giolito, to me, although I wouldn't be upset about that one, that feels more like you're taking a leap of faith and hopes that he can get there, where the other 2 have shown that they are what you're searching for. I would just lean more towards Aaron Nola, and it's no shot against Blake Snell. It's just you're losing a lot with this rotation. And I think when you look at how you're building this rotation moving forward, you're going to be implementing a lot of younger guys that are going to have to develop. And I don't know much about Aaron Nola. I've just read a lot about Aaron Nola compared to Blake Snell. And Aaron Nola seems like that kind of guy that you want to be at the helm of your rotation, working with the younger pitchers in your team and your roster. And if that's how you're going to go with it, maybe that's the direction I feel a little bit more comfortable with.
So you're signing him for his leadership.
Leadership, but also the performance, because to me, he is a number 1. And I know Blake Snell's got the strikeout stuff, but Aaron Nola has performed like a number 1. And I know you're paying for the past rather than the future, but I think you're doing the same thing with Blake Snell also. So either of those 2 I'd be fine with.
My concern with Nola is just like 2 of the last 3 years, he's had an ERA above 4.5.
Yeah.
And so, like, while you are paying for the past production, you're also wondering what's more real, what he did in 2022 when he had a 3.2 ERA, or what he did in 21 and in 23 where he had an ERA north of 4.5. It does remind me so much of Miles Mikolas, dude, because Miles Mikolas last year was awesome. And every year, you know what you're getting out of him. He's going to give you 180 or more innings, and when he's healthy, you feel pretty good about him starting every fifth day. But do you feel great about him starting against another number one? Do you feel good about him going up against Spencer Strider in a playoff series or against a Blake Snell in a playoff series? I really don't. And so as I look to Aaron Nola, I think I like the idea of Nola better than I like what you're actually bringing in by getting Aaron Nola. I want Aaron Nola on the last contract that he had. I don't know that I want Aaron Nola on a 6-year deal worth $25 million per season. Like, if that's my option and Snell won't come here, I would be happy to have him. Don't get me wrong. Like, it helps your rotation. I think it makes you better. But I do wonder, like, who's going to have a better season next year? Jordan Montgomery or Aaron Nola? I don't think it's crazy to say the answer is Jordan Montgomery. And if that ends up being the case and I can get Montgomery at like $16 to $20 million a year on like a 3 or 4 year deal, or I can get Nola on a 5-year deal worth 25 plus, I would rather just have Jordan Montgomery, who I know and I think he can work out well for me here. Is that fair? Is that crazy? Because I know Aaron Nola certainly has more brand name.
I don't think that's crazy. I will say this. I think the one thing that you can probably guarantee with Nola is you're probably going to have what you just said about Mikolas, where, you know what, like, worst case scenario, he's at like the 4.3 ERA. Best case, he's in like the low threes, but he's a guy that's going to take the ball every day, give you 6 innings. And the reason that I don't have as much concern with him is because he is a control pitcher. Though his stuff has diminished, he's a control pitcher, which is why his numbers are better. The thing with Snell is like and look, he may live through the 5-year deal, 6-year deal he signs and have great stuff throughout it. But the moment that stuff starts to diminish with Snell, the less effective he becomes and becomes more of a high volatile pitcher for me. And that would be my concern, is because, sure, he has great stuff, but he walks the world, and if he starts to lose stuff, the stuff that he relies on to bail himself out of those walks, it becomes a major issue for Blake Snell. So that would be my one concern of Snell. But again, I don't think you should operate on that in the offseason, because you're so desperate for a number one guy.
Spending $25+ million on any pitcher and giving out 5+ years on any pitcher is going to be scary, because they all have so much risk that's baked in. With Snell, it's the walks, it's what happens when his stuff goes, and it's the injury history. Those are all going to be there. That's part of his profile. There's no getting around it. And also, like, Blake Snell's a different kind of cat. He is not the kind of pitcher or player that the Cardinals typically bet on. He doesn't have the same personality that you typically expect out of a St. Louis Cardinal. He's the one that talked publicly about the video games, right? Like, this is not what you would typically expect them to sign, especially to a big money type of a deal. Aaron Nola is that guy. Personality-wise, he makes a ton of sense for them. But when you look at the profile of the pitcher that he is, it's kind of the profile that they've been trying to get away from recently. And if you look at a guy like Lucas Giolito, I totally get how you can talk yourself into it. I, frankly, have talked myself into Giolito over in Aaron Nola. Like, I think I'm there. I would rather sign Giolito than Aaron Nola, because I think there's more upside with Giolito. But I can't guarantee that it's going to work out. Like, there's absolutely ways that this thing goes awry. We talked with, Eno Saris last year, and he said, hey, guys, I think he might be one of the players that was kind of messed up with because of the sticky stuff being reduced, right? So I don't know. I don't know what his future is going to hold.
Here's the one thing I ask myself when I'm thinking of this is, what's more likely you can get in the trade on a younger controlled pitcher? Because that's the other factor into all of this. Because they're not acquiring 1s and 2s for this rotation next year all through free agency. One of these is going to be a trade with significant pieces in your minor league system, or these young controlled players that are at the major league level. What's more likely do you acquire with that upside? Is it the swing and miss stuff, or is it the profile that Aaron Nola was at the beginning of his career? Because, see, I think if you look at the Marlins, if they make sense, or if you look at the Mariners, they got a lot of guys with swing and miss stuff.
Yeah, it's not as effective as Snow, but I think you're right.
Yeah, and I would rather get the young, controlled swing and miss stuff and get the veteran who knows how to work with his pitches.
Maybe I misinterpreted your question. You asked which one's easier to get.
More likely to get.
I think, to me, the answer to both is actually the Aaron Nola type.
But see, I think both systems, Marlins and Mariners, which make the most sense via trade, have more swing and miss stuff with their young pitchers.
Options open up in the offseason. And if the Cardinals end up saying, you know what, we're not trading Nolan Gorman, we're not trading Brendan Donovan because his value's low because he just had surgery on his forearm.
Classic Cardinals.
And we're not going to go out there and trade like a Jordan Walker or Lars Nootbaar because we think they're a big part of our future in the outfield. Well, then you're probably going to have to go the Aaron Savali route. And Aaron Savali is the guy that was just traded at the deadline for a prospect, and he profiles to be very similar, honestly, to Aaron Nola. Like if you ask me who ends up being better over the next 3 years, Savali versus Nola, I would take Nola because of his history, but I don't know that it's as big of a gap as we're all expecting it to be. And Savali's going to be cost controlled and super cheap. Could I find the next Aaron Savali, the guy that next year? Like here's the way I would put it. I think I would rather just go out and trade for Jose Quintana. If you're telling me I'm going to go get a guy like Aaron Nola and pay him $25 million a year, I would rather just go trade for Jose Quintana and pay him 10 for next season and not have to give up much in that deal with the Mets. That would be the route that I would go to get that profile of a pitcher.
I would rather get Nola and then spend the cost that it's going to take to get one of those young swing and miss guys from either the Marlins or Mariners.
Yeah, I want to abandon the Nola profile, and I want just swing and miss arms. I think it's time to play modern baseball, and I think that's where the Cardinals have been lacking in terms of in their pitching department is the lack of swing and miss, and it is time for the 5-and-dive starter here in St. Louis. I know nobody wants to hear that, but that is what it's time for because that's modern baseball. That's how you win in the modern game. Why was I so critical of the offense when I first started doing this show? Because it wasn't a modern offense. It didn't slug. It was station to station. It's why they kind of had their struggles, and they couldn't win in the postseason. Granted, they still haven't won the postseason. They needed to slug, baby, slug. Now the pitching needs to miss bats, and it needs to be as effective as possible. So that 10 strikeouts in 5 innings guy, yeah, I want him. And then I'll just piece it together with the bullpen. I'm ready for all swing and miss. I'm ready to abandon the Nola profile because I've got a Michaelis that can fit that profile that's under contract.
It is an interesting point because, like, you look at the best teams in all of Major League Baseball, and the truth is, like, they all have what you're talking about. You look at the Rangers, look at the front end of their rotation. How are they doing this right now? Well, with a bunch of swing and miss for the most part with their rotation. You look at the Braves. How are they doing this? Well, they've got Max Fried, Charlie Morton, and Spencer Strider at the front end of their rotation. It's terrifying going into a playoff series. Sandy Alcantara, Braxton Garrett. They've got a bunch of dudes at the front end of the rotation down in Miami right now. The Brewers, we know what that top 2 looks like. Swing and miss stuff. The Dodgers, when they're at their best and they've got their guys healthy, you got Julio Urias, you've got Clayton Kershaw, Tony Gonsolin. Like you've got some serious swing and miss at the front end of the rotation, and the same thing is true to at least to a lesser degree with the Diamondbacks as well. They don't have this quite the same swing and miss, but with Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen, it's pretty good at the front end.
I think at best you should have like one arm in a rotation that is a quote-unquote pitch to contact that can maybe eat innings. Like that's what Michaelis is. And that's what, when you look at that Rangers rotation, which you just mentioned, it's kind of what Monty kind of fits into now. He does have some swing and miss stuff, but that's what Dane Dunning was for them. They had the guys at the top end that got the swing and miss. What did Dunning do? He pitched to contact and kind of 8 innings for them, as the Cardinals learned the hard way when they played Texas. Like you should have one guy at that. Should have 2, shouldn't have 3. Eating the innings, a guy that's throwing 200 innings, that's not a thing anymore. Like, the number one guy should probably throw 180 innings for the Cardinals next year. Why? Because he's got swing and miss stuff. He's going about 5 innings every start.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up in about 10, 15 minutes or so, we'll get to questions and answers. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. But coming up next, Eli Drinkwitz made some really compelling arguments about why college sports have gone in a way that is not really helpful for anybody involved, other than the guys that are getting the money. We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendrickson, USA Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Cardinals fall to the Rockies yesterday 1-0 as they dropped 2 of 3 to Colorado. They are off today as they head to Tampa Bay, where they'll start a 3-game set tomorrow night. 5:40 will be first pitch as Miles Michaels gets the start for St. Louis. Zach Eflin will get the start for the Tampa Bay Rays. This Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff. Find your road shop 24/7 at londoff.com, londoffautoPlex.com. Are you kidding me?
Pitch. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. So if you missed it over the weekend, college football was basically lit on fire. Whatever the conferences that you remember from Thursday, they no longer exist. The Pac-12 is imploding right before our very eyes. They tried to do something that the Arizona athletic director just came out and said, the TV package the Pac-12 was selling us was like if we were going back to Little League and trying to sell candy bars. So it's not what you want. Basically, what they were selling was, hey, you will get a portion of whatever the subscriptions are that we get from Apple TV. In other words, you got to sell this and then you get a portion of the proceeds. Not ideal. That's not what you're looking for. All these other leagues have something that's a guaranteed dollar figure upfront from ESPN, from Fox, etc. So didn't work out, and now what you have is the Pac-12 is getting its last rites. Eli Drinkwitz was asked about this over the weekend, and listen, I've had my fair share of disagreements with Drink on some of the things that he said. I thought he had one of the best, most well-thought-out answers on this that I've heard really anywhere. Here's Eli Drinkwitz on conference realignment and who actually benefits from it.
My question is, did we count the cost? I'm not talking about a financial cost. I'm talking about, did we count the cost for the student athletes involved in this decision? What cost is it to those student athletes? We're talking about a football decision. They based off football, but what about softball and baseball who have to travel cross-country? Do we ask about the cost to them? Do we know what the number one indicator of symptom of or cause of mental health is? It's lack of rest and sleep. Traveling in those baseball, softball games, you know, those people, they travel commercial. They get done playing at 4. They got to go to the airport. They come back. It's 3 or 4 in the morning. They got to go to class. Did we ask any of them? I don't worry at all about the game. The game is going to be strong. Football's going to be fine. We'll all figure it out. But did we consider the people that we are entrusted with? Did we consider the student athlete? Because then we're asking them to go out on their own to get NIL. We didn't say we're going to revenue share. We're not saying they're getting a piece of it. So that's the thing that's bothering me right now in this whole situation is we keep trying to limit what the student athlete can do, but then we act on our own.
So all of this is about money. Everything about conference realignment, really, I mean, money makes the world go round, right? We all know how this works. But conference realignment is all about the money. How can we get the most money possible? And really, it's about TV for our TV rights deals. The SEC, boatload of money. Big Ten, boatload of money. Everybody else trying to be more like the SEC and the Big Ten when it comes to the money that they're getting for their TV rights deals. And so what does that mean? Well, Oklahoma, Texas, Texas A&M, and Missouri. Welcome to the SEC, friends. Might not make a whole lot of sense regionally, but here you are. Welcome to the SEC. When you look at what you've got now with the Big Ten, because of what I've always thought of the Big Ten is California, Washington. Yeah. These teams make all the sense in the world for my Midwestern Big Ten Conference. Rutgers, come on down. None of this makes any sense. None of it. Unless you just look at the dollar signs that are coming as a result of this. And that's where we're at, man. Does it make it better for college football or for college baseball or for anything else that Washington University is a part of the Big Ten? Hell no, man. It's not good for the kids. It's not good for the rivalries. It's not good for any of that. But it's not about any of that. It's about how do we get the most money possible for our revenue streams, and how do we make sure that we have a place at the table with one of the 2 conferences that matter whenever this thing consolidates to the point where those are the 2 conferences that have the best chance possible to get to the college football playoff. Because again, that goes back to the revenue streams. That's what this is all about. It's what it's always been about. And man, it is frustrating as hell that this is where we've arrived.
Yeah, I mean, I got to imagine Eli Drinkwitz is probably a hero now for a lot of colleges, especially baseball and softball programs, for what he said, because I mean, he's right. Like, thinking of all of those other athletes that don't get the benefits that obviously the college football side of it does when it comes to the money and everything that comes with it. I mean, just speaking from personal experience, and it's not a D1 school, it was D2 at the time or transitioning to D2 when I was at Lindenwood. Like, I've done a couple of those baseball trips before. And again, it's not the same where you're traveling across the country, but it is exhausting being on a bus like that and like in a short time frame, and you're driving around and you're not getting much sleep. Now imagine doing that at the D1 level where you're going even further and you're cooped up in a bus and you're taking commercial flights and you got to worry about the classes and you're also not getting that NIL money. So I understand everything he's saying, and frankly, I think it's good that Eli said it because somebody needed to in that sense. The unfortunate part is you can say everything you want, Drink, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. Money talks, and money's going to continue to talk, and it's just the world's going to keep on spinning now.
Yeah, I'm glad he said it, though, because I think what he said was right, and I'm glad what he had to say about it on thinking of the student-athlete, because I do find it to be ridiculous that you've got these schools operating in this manner, seeking out the biggest dollar sign, not worrying about the student-athlete, but then they freak out when the student-athlete is trying to make their money by doing NIL. Like, they're trying to limit NIL for athletes, but yet they're not going to limit themselves of what they do for their revenue streaming. That's the thing that just irks me in the way that the NCAA has operated. So I'm glad what Drink came out to say. And look, Drink's been one of those that's kind of been iffy on NIL and the transfer portal.
He has not been. Drink's been up front of being like on the front lines of trying to get the most out of that, for what it's worth.
But I think the way that it is operated from the NCAA and the presidents deciding this and conference realignment is ridiculous with the way that most of the NCAA has acted towards NIL and name, image, and likeness.
If we could go back to 2010, let's say, and there's no way to make this happen because everybody's trying to get the scrap from the tables to get the most money for their respective conferences. If we could just make it somehow equitable for these conferences to just have 5 conferences that make sense geographically, where like the Big 12 is Midwestern, the Big 10 is Upper Midwest, right? The Pac-12 remains like Pacific Coast Conference. The ACC is the Atlantic Coast Conference. If we could just keep those teams where they were and we could find a way to make the money work for everybody, all of this would have been better. And I say this as a Mizzou fan, where T-Bone, as an Illinois fan, Alex, for us as Mizzou fans, like, we ended up with a team that is, they have a seat at the table. They're fine. They're good long term. There's no issues with Illinois or with Mizzou with where they're at. But, man, I would rather have Mizzou back in the Big 12 if the money was right, but the money wasn't right. The stability of the conference was non-existent at the time. So Mizzou had to make the move that they did to the SEC. It was the correct move at the time. Washington should have done this over the weekend. They were absolutely correct in going to the Big Ten. Like, teams should be bolting for whatever it is that they can do. Florida State is correct in sounding the alarm bells on the ACC. Clemson should be doing the same thing very soon. These teams that have a future, these programs that do, they should all be doing exactly what they're trying to do, which is look out for number one. The problem is there was nobody in charge of college sports in 2010 that said, hey, instead of all of us looking out for yourselves, what if we tried to do something that ends up being better for the greater good? What if we try to make this work for everybody involved so that way we can all survive together? But none of them were willing or able to do that at the time. And now, because once that thing started rolling, man, this was always the logical conclusion. It was always going to get down to the Big Ten and the SEC as the 2 legitimate power players, and everybody else was battling to be number 3 in that list of the conferences that matter the most. And so now we get to see it. Pac-12 is going to die, and then it'll become the Big 12 versus the ACC. And at that point, we'll find out which of those teams end up in the Big Ten and the SEC. I have no idea how they're going to make this thing work scheduling-wise. Like, football is what makes the world go round money-wise, and money's what matters. The scheduling is going to be wild when these teams... The Big Ten could have 24 teams in it 15 years from now.
I wonder if you're looking at either A, expansion in conference play, or B, expansion in terms of what the regular season is for college football. That seems to be the route that it is going, would be my guess.
Or like a 16 or 20-team playoff, 24-team playoff, something like that, where you're just like whittling the season. I don't know. I genuinely have no idea what they're going to do to be able to make this.
You get rid of the non-con play and you just go straight conference play and only play like 8 games.
Yeah, like 10 games of conference play, similar to the 2020 season, and then you get down to the end and you have like 4 pods that you're coming out of, and the top 2 teams from each of those pods like work their way down. I don't know how it's going to end up working, but it is not best for college football, to say the least. Coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers here on 101 ESPN. Talking about college football realignment, college sports realignment. Pat McAfee, he's got Pete Thamel on his show right now. Pete Thamel of ESPN.com, one of the best college football insiders in the country. Pete Thamel just told him there's been some smoke about Stanford going to the ACC. All four teams in the Pac-12 are still together, but they're exploring their other options. So the four teams that remain in the Pac-12 today are Washington State, Oregon State, Stanford, and Cal. Can't wait for that epic tennis battle between Washington State and Miami. It's going to be the best. That's what we got to have, guys. Traveling cross country from Washington State down to Miami.
I'm sure Washington State athletes will be okay with it. Miami, maybe not so much.
For sure, especially those away matches.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to questions and answers. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Guys, do you think Sunday's game was the ideal outcome for the Cardinals? Bottom 6 teams make the MLB draft lottery. Cardinals could end up with a top 2 or 3 pick. You liked what you saw out of Thompson and JoJo Romero, and the game was over in 2.5 minutes. Oh, by the way, did I mention that they lost? Yes, I think that is your ideal game down the stretch. What we saw yesterday.
Positives and you still lose. Yeah, I would say so. If only the Blues would have done that more at the end of their season.
No kidding. But yeah, I think that is the ideal game for the Cardinals moving forward. You lose a game, you see an outcome that you like from a young player, and you go, all right, well, there was that at least. So yeah, I'm in on that.
Guys, I'm going to have to learn a lot more about the Major League Baseball draft lottery, because apparently there's some kind of caveat of like, the Royals, and I think it was Washington, if I'm not mistaken, can't have, it was either a top 5 or a top 10 pick this year.
Yeah.
Because it's like back-to-back seasons. There's the new CBA threw all of this into flux.
I knew Washington had that this year. I can't remember exactly how it landed.
Everything that I've read seems a lot like hockey's now, to where the higher you are, the worse you are, the higher your odds are of getting the pick. And yeah, if you win it back-to-back years, you can't win it for 5 years or something like that.
Yeah.
It does at least seem like the general rules I've read seems an awful lot like
Wait,
hockey.
is that a rule in hockey?
Yeah.
Where if you win it
But
back-to-back?
they just instigated on that new CBA. Well, it's not back-to-back, but I think if you win it multiple times in a 3 or 5 year span.
There's a slight caveat, though. It's a little different because it's not just winning the lottery. It's being in like the top 5 or 10 picks.
Yeah. So that's the
with
difference.
Major League Baseball. And in baseball, it's much smoother. So the number 1 team, like the worst team in Major League Baseball, has a 16% chance to get the number 1 pick. So does the 3rd worst team in Major League Baseball. They all have the exact same odds for that number 1 overall pick. So Oakland, with 32 wins right now, has the same odds to get the number 1 overall pick as the Chicago White Sox with 45. So the Cardinals are right behind them, man. The Cardinals have 49 wins on the season. They're only 4 games back of Chicago for the 4th best odds right now to win the lottery. And I'm pretty sure if I'm right on the Kansas City thing, it would actually be the 3rd best odds to win the lottery this year, which is tied for the best odds to win the lottery this year.
Top 5 pick. That's all you need.
I've heard also this is a down year draft.
Oh, and it's a bad free agent class, as we heard in Stark's piece last week.
Not ideal.
All right, we'll turn it around, though.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Guys, what's your level of concern that Paul Goldschmidt is going through another late season slump?
0. I'm not concerned because I've seen it 2 years ago. We got hot down the stretch, and
it's been weird, right?
He's 2 years older now, though.
I know, but like he still had a really good year. I'm not concerned. I think part of the late season struggles potentially this year, and we'll see what the rest of August and September looks like. If he remains cold through those months, okay, then I'll be more concerned.
The lack of power is something that I think is worth keeping an eye on.
The thing for me, though, is like I think right now, like he wouldn't say this, and nobody in the Cardinals organization would say this right now. It's tough to remain motivated if you're Paul Goldschmidt right now.
If it started in August, I would be totally with you. 435 slugging percentage in June, 400 slugging percentage in July, 280 slugging percentage. It's 6 games, but whatever. In the month of August. The lack of a slug is probably something worth keeping an eye on. He has a total of 5 doubles in the last 50 games. That's not your typical Paul Goldschmidt type of stretch here. And it's really the majority of the season that he's had this. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on. I would not be overly concerned about it. But Alex, where are you at on
I'm kind of taking it with a grain of salt, like what T-Bone said, to where it is a year where I think the deeper it gets into the season and the more the team loses, it's hard to stay motivated for a Paul Goldschmidt. But I would say that over the past 2 years combined, it's a little concerning, because if there's guys you're going to need down the stretch next season, it's going to be guys like Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado. The good news is Wilson Contreras is hitting really well right now, so maybe that benefits the team if they do lose Paul for a little bit next year.
Now, I will say this, like, again, I don't think it's too much of like red alarm bells going off for me right now. I mean, these are the kind of conversations that I've had behind the scenes with you guys as to why I'm not giving Goldschmidt an extension this spring.
I agree.
I wouldn't either, for what it's worth. I would wait on that.
Yeah, the cold stretches are getting longer with Paul Goldschmidt. The power continue, as you just said, has gone down monthly as he's getting older. Like, you're starting to see signs of that decline from Paul Goldschmidt. Now, granted, he won an MVP last year, but he went really cold. Like, his September was bad that he was like
almost lost it.
He was locked in as the MVP at the end of August. To like at the end of September, is he still that guy? Is he still the MVP? And yes, he won it, but he had a very bad September.
Basically, the question is, his first year that he was in St. Louis, 2019, he finished the season 15% above the league average. If that's who you got the last 3 years of his career here in St. Louis, what are you paying for that? Because that's probably what you should be projecting, is like a really good hitter that is not an MVP candidate any longer. And if you're willing to pay whatever it is that he's asking for that production, okay, cool, no problem. But if it ends up being where you're having to pay him $30 million a year, he's very unlikely to be worth that at that point in his career after the next season of his contracts, because he'll be 37 years old when that deal begins. The aging curve is a real thing. All right, final thing here, guys. In a fantasy world, what do you think it would realistically take to get Shohei Ohtani to St. Louis? Over on that piece that we talked about from ESPN, they said 11 years and $600 million. That sounds about right.
I think that's probably the contract he gets, is around 10, 11 years, right around $600 million. And I wouldn't do that, but...
So, whatever, it's not my money. I would sign Shohei Ohtani for whatever it ends up being on the market. This is going to sound so weird. I don't think this is the team that needs him in that way. I think this team needs a superstar starting pitcher, and Ohtani brings that to the table, don't get me wrong, but it's probably the skill that's going to translate the worst over that contract. And while this team, yeah, you'd always love to have another bat, I would not want to pay $30 million for a bat this offseason. So if you don't need to go get a $30 million bat, I would not pay Shohei Ohtani $55 million per year to come here. I know that sounds crazy. Like, if you get Shohei Ohtani, you obviously are thrilled, but I don't think the Cardinals are one of the teams that should be in that market, unfortunately. If it was $30 million a year, I would do it for just the pitching side.
$500 million total, and then a season pass to Six Flags. That's what gets him here.
Could we throw in a Magic House season pass?
Yeah.
Throw in whatever you want.
Free tours to the Arch.
Free tours of the Arch, Grant's Farm, free beers for life at Grant's Farm.
Oh.
Free goat petting. My kids would love that.
Free trips to Sajay whenever he wants. It's available.
I think that's going to come no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, he's a pro, man.
Well, not like that, but
he's Alex Ferrario. You never know. I'm Brandon Kiley. That's Tanner Hendrickson. Coming up next, there's a new excuse that's being trotted out for the Cardinals' struggles this year, and T-Bone is not buying it. We'll tell you what it is next here on 101 ESPN.
is exactly where you want to be listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
So there was a piece earlier today on ESPN.com with a whole lot of speculation and some finger pointing on why things went awry for the Chicago White Sox this season. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Kenyon Middleton came out and told reporters, hey, there's just not a whole lot of leadership in Chicago right now. In fact, there's guys that are falling asleep in the bullpen. There's guys that are missing their PFP practices. There's guys that are late to meetings. Like, it's a disaster right now for the Chicago White Sox. He said, listen, it's not the manager right now necessarily, because this has been a culture that has been filtering through with the White Sox for years. And because of the World Baseball Classic, guys like Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito, Kendall Graveman, all of these guys were out at the World Baseball Classic, and so you weren't able to really come together as a team in spring training. Alex, that's the backdrop for the conversation that I would like to have today about your St. Louis Cardinals. Because there was a piece from Ben Hochman. The title is, would the Cardinals 2023 have been different if not for the World Baseball Classic? It's a couple interesting quotes in here, from Ollie Marmol in particular. He said, the World Baseball Classic is not an excuse. It's something that we needed to navigate, and I don't think we came out of it very well. He then goes on to talk about how they've had a bunch of new pitchers and catchers that needed to work together, specifically with Wilson Contreras coming in. He said having a new catcher is the equivalent of having a new quarterback. So you're inserting a new guy behind the plate without your main guys on the field, and that became a different dynamic. It was something that they did have to overcome, and we all saw it. We watched it play out. It didn't go well for the Cardinals this year. Alex, do you think this is a legitimate explanation? Do you think this is nothing more than an excuse? When you see stuff about this, how do you view it?
I feel like it's an excuse. I can understand the sentiment, and I agree with Ollie that getting a new catcher is like having a new quarterback, and you want him to work with all of your pitchers. But this goes back to the blame conversation of the catcher versus the pitcher on that side of it. And I'm not going to rehash that, but I don't think that defines what really took place. And the pitchers that I look at, and specifically starting pitching, because at the beginning of the season, that was the bigger narrative of this team, specifically the first 5 starts for a majority of these guys. Yeah, Miles Mikolas and Adam Wainwright both really struggled. But so did Jordan Montgomery, so did Jack Flaherty. Jordan Montgomery, not so much. He was actually really good. But Jack Flaherty and Steven Matz both had 6+ ERAs in their first 5 starts, and they weren't at the World Baseball Classic. Now, maybe that's working with Wilson Contreras, but by that time, Wilson wasn't starting all the time. They were kind of getting some Andrew Kisner in there here and there. So, no, I don't buy that. I can understand that, yeah, maybe it caused a little bit of issues for certain quote-unquote team bonding aspects of it, but no, overall to sit here and say that this could be a playoff contender if they didn't play in the World Baseball Classic, no, because your pitching was still bad for the first month of the season.
Yeah, that's the thing for me is, like, I could understand it maybe if your pitching wasn't so bad, and that's the thing is, it's an excuse for me because this team was destined to fail with the rotation and the bullpen that they had. Like, they weren't going to have success even if they had a average month. I don't think they would have been good early on in April. And heck, I took out the month of April and I went and looked to see what their record was from May till the trade deadline. They were still below 500, 37 and 41. And if you're going to use the World Baseball Classic as an excuse, a good team could still figure it out after one bad month. The Cardinals didn't do that. They were still below 500. They were bad in June, and they got tired after 19 games. So I don't want to hear it as an excuse. You just weren't a good baseball team. You weren't built to be successful at the Major League level because you didn't have enough good quality starting pitching, and you don't have a bullpen that you can trust because they were blowing saves. And Mikolas, look, I understand his – I think he can be a guy that can truly use the World Baseball Classic as an excuse. Wasn't stretched out early on. Once he got built up, you've seen it. Miles Mikolas has been very effective ever since he came back. But Adam Wainwright, Father Time, has just caught up to Adam Wainwright. Nolan Arenado struggling when he got back from the WBC. That's not on the WBC because typically the stories coming from the WBC is those players that play in it as position players typically come back and play well early on because they're ramped up and ready to go. So that is more on the player and not on the WBC for coming out and struggling early on. So, no, I think it's an excuse, and I don't want to hear anything about it from the St. Louis Cardinals organization using it as to why they've struggled.
Two more guys that I wanted to bring up, Helsley and Hicks, in the first, 9 games for both of those guys, which was basically the month of April. 0-4 record with 5 blown saves. Hicks had a 6.35 ERA. Helsley had a 4.5 ERA. So they were struggling also.
Yeah, the whole team sucked for the first 34 games of the season. Like, terrible. Not good at all.
And in the
way,
last
shape, or
34
form.
games of the season.
So May 6th is when they lost to the Tigers. At that point, they had lost 3 straight to the Angels, 3 straight to the Dodgers, and then 2 straight to the Tigers. You guys remember that one. That was when they lost in 10 innings. At that point in time, here are some of the ERAs for the Cardinals pitching staff. Miles Michaelis, 5.8. Jack Flaherty, 6.3. Steven Matz, 6.4. Adam Wainwright, 7.2. Andre Palante, 7.6. Jordan Hicks, 7.6. There's your explanation. Like, those guys were all really bad. And the other thing is, like, we remember it at the time, the Cardinals were having, like, really good underlying numbers, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't working for them offensively. They weren't driving runners in with runners in scoring position. The defense had taken a step back, and we were all wondering why that was. And it was pretty clear that, hey, it's because Jordan Walker's not very good defensively. You don't have a good catcher defensively any longer, and Nolan Arenado took a big step back defensively. Now, he's been great defensively over the last month or so, but the first 3 months of the season was a huge step back from where he was a year ago, where he played as well defensively as we've ever seen from him. And you were trying to figure things out with your outfield. It seemed like it was the whack-a-mole where whoever you played struggled or they ended up getting hurt. Tyler O'Neill went down. He was getting called out publicly by the manager after like 2 weeks. I don't think this stuff was because of the World Baseball Classic. I think some of it was, hey, these guys went to the World Baseball Classic and they weren't ready. If you want to use that for Miles Michaelis, totally fair. I actually think that's probably true. But I think the bigger problem was this team just never came together. Early on in the season, they weren't together, and then they got in such a bind at that 10-24 stretch, they were never going to be able to overcome it. It would have required, we talked about it, there was like 3 teams on history that overcame the kind of start that the Cardinals had and made the playoffs. One of them, the most notable one, was the Astros, who ended up going to the World Series in, what was that, 05, I think, something like that. They had great starting pitching, like genuinely excellent starting pitching on that team. And when we looked at the Cardinals rotation, I remember we had Brad Ausmus on the show. It's like, I think the Cardinals could make a run similar to what we did with that Astros team. And we looked at each other. We were like, but they don't have the pitching, right? And he was like, no, I think they might. They didn't. They never had the pitching. That was what sunk this season from start to finish, was the pitching.
And I just, again, I can understand Ollie's sentiments of not getting these guys on the same page, especially with the catcher and that being part of the reason with the pitcher. But then you doubled down on it not being the World Baseball Classic by saying, Wilson Contreras didn't prep properly, and they took him out of the catching role, and then questioned if he was even going to be a catcher for them. Why? He was the one that was at spring training early, ready to work with everybody. So that just, to me, I can't look at it that way, because you threw so many different things at this season saying that, this or this or this or this, pitching, and then we need more strikeout stuff, and then Wilson Contreras, and then the defense. If you sit there and be like, it was the World Baseball Classic. There's no way that was the World Baseball Classic for how many things that went wrong from the start of the season until where they went on that 2-week stretch, the middle of May. There's no way World Baseball would leave that much lingering effects.
I do. This is where I kind of zig a little bit. I do think the World Baseball Classic hurt the Cardinals. I don't think it's why the season went as south as it did. Like, I don't think it helped that Miles Michaelis wasn't himself early on in the season. If you had typical mid-season form Miles Michaelis, I think they would have been better off. Fine was a little too strong. They would have been better off because he would have given you a chance every 5th day. And that's more than I could have said about the other 4 spots in their rotation at that point. But that wouldn't have fixed Waino. Waino was broken. We now see that. It just was never going to work for him. Helsley was broken. At that point, Jordan Hicks was broken. They fixed him eventually, but it took too long before their season was already sunk at that point in the season. Giovanni Gallegos, I don't think he was more prone to blow-ups this year because of the World Baseball Classic. I think he's just becoming more prone to blow-ups because that's what happens with relievers over time. I think your defense was worse because your defense isn't as good as it was a year ago. You don't have the personnel that you had. So I think a lot of this just goes back to you didn't have the dudes, and the Cardinals are looking for explanations as to why some of their dudes took a step back. Some of it's age, Arenado, Goldie. Some are, you could make the same case for Waino. Some of it was a lack of preparation. I think Matt's the weird offseason coming off of the injury for his knee. Probably a little bit of an explanation as to why he started off so slow. Michaelis with the World Baseball Classic. And a lot of it is just you didn't have the guys. So you look back on it. Is it a legitimate explanation for some of it? Maybe. But the majority of it is not excused or explained by the World Baseball Classic. Coming up next, there's one team right now who, unless they win it all, it's a failure. Who else fits into that criteria? We'll give you some of our examples next year on 101 ESPN.
It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
The U.S. women's national team suffered a defeat over the weekend. It did not go well for them. They had no business losing that game whatsoever. And alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Guys, this is seen as a failure by almost everybody because they didn't win the Women's World Cup. And that is the only thing that is deemed a success. Really, honestly, the only thing that is deemed acceptable from the women's national team at this point. If they don't win at all, you failed. If you get to the championship game and lose, fail. There's not a whole lot of teams that we can say this about. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Alex, this is for a lot of different reasons. Mostly it's because of their own expectations from previous success that they have been propped up to this level of you need to go out there and win it all. I think the U.S. men's basketball team is honestly up at that level now where they have gotten back to the place of, hey, if you guys don't win at all, what are you doing? Like, how does that even happen? But the game has gotten better on the international stage. There are other teams that are really freaking good and play together a lot more often than the men's team do. But let's set that aside for a second. The women's team was deemed a failure this year. Who else is in that category for you? Like, what other pro sports teams right now, if they don't win at all, their season was a failure?
I think there's two teams obvious in the NFL. It's the Chiefs and the Bills. Those two teams, if they exit the season without a Super Bowl victory, it was a failure.
Can I follow up on that?
I was just going to say, I don't know if I'd put Cincinnati if that was the team you were asking.
No, I was actually going with the Bills. I don't know that people would consider it a failure if they got to the Super Bowl this year and didn't win it. Because they haven't even been to an AFC championship game.
That's
fair.
Like,
they need to take that next step for me to consider them to be like a championship or bust. But the Bengals, I actually think, are more in that lane for me.
But see, I think you built that Buffalo team just because of the expiring contracts for the rookie deals and now all of the money being allocated to guys like Diggs and Von Miller and Josh Allen. I would say the money has forced them into this position that you need to win a Super Bowl.
I think that's fair. I think I would put them kind of in the category that BK had them at because you got to take down your like number one nemesis in the Chiefs before you can be even considered one of the favorites in the AFC. But I agree. I would put Bengals up there. I think the Eagles are starting to work their way into that category with how weak the NFC is. Pushing outside the NFL, I would put the Lakers in this category. Like, you've got LeBron James, Anthony Davis. LeBron, one of the greatest players of all time. Like, your expectation is to always win. LeBron expects you to build a team to always win a championship.
Have them there because last year, like, I deemed it a massive success given what they were able to accomplish with an aging LeBron James and a core that was solid, but not like the best thing that you've ever seen. I didn't have the Lakers as one of my teams.
I view the Lakers season last year as a failure. You've got LeBron James, one of the best players of all time, and though he's aging, he's still like a top 10 player in the NBA. Like, you should win with him. And you've got Anthony Davis there. And you built a very poor core around him. Yes, I agree their season was like, hey, look, we got into the play-in game or avoid the play-in game. Like, that was a success in their mind, but they built that team poorly around LeBron James. Like, they should be expected to win a title every year.
Here's a question for you guys. And Alex, I'm genuinely curious your thoughts on this specifically. Was Tampa here? The Lightning? Would the Lightning be considered a championship or bust type of a team, given what they've accomplished? Like, when they get to the playoffs and they get to the Eastern Conference Finals, I don't even know that it registers anymore. I feel like the only way for them to be considered a success, and forget the regular season, nobody cares about that in Tampa anymore. It's just championship or bust for that core at this point.
See, I think since they've won it so many times recently, I don't know if it would be looked at as a failure. Like, if they lost in the Stanley Cup final, I think you look at it as, wow, they got there again. That's impressive.
Vegas was in that category.
Vegas was in that category. The other teams, Toronto, you said it. I mean, Toronto absolutely should have been in that category. The other one, Boston.
Boston this past season was because they were all in. Like, it was, we don't know what the future is for Bergeron, for Krejci. Like, this is our core for 1 year.
Yeah.
And then because of the way that the contracts all kind of stacked up, they knew it was probably going to be a retool in 2024. So I'm totally with you. For 1 year last year, they were in this category. The thing that I find interesting is the teams that are like perennially in it. The Chiefs, I think, are really the only team in the NFL to that degree. Like the Bills, if they got to the Super Bowl this year, like we could talk to Donnie about this down the hall. If they got to the Super Bowl and lost, Donnie would be over the moon happy.
Yeah.
Because it would be the greatest accomplishment he's seen in 30 years from his football team. You can't say that about the Chiefs. If the Chiefs get to the Super Bowl and lose, every Chiefs fan is going to be like, how did that happen? That is a massive disappointment on every level for this team in 2023-24 the season. It's very rare for a team or an organization to get to that point. The women's team is obviously there. The men's basketball team is obviously there. I feel like Tiger was there in golf for a long time, where it was he either wins the tournament or you don't care where he finishes, honestly. Serena was there with tennis.
I think Djokovic is there right now.
It's a lot more in individual sports than it is in team sports because of how hard it is to accomplish what we're talking about in team sports. I think college football has this a little bit, like Georgia. No Georgia fan cares if they go 12-0 this year and lose in the championship.
Bama's still in that conversation? I think they still belong. I think Alabama fans are disappointed that they're number 2 to Georgia.
To a degree, yeah. I think Ohio State's in that conversation because of how much success they've had.
Michigan.
Now it's time to finally be able to make that next step. I think Michigan maybe is in that conversation as well. It's rare, though, man. What we saw this weekend, pretty big disappointment for the women's national team, to say the least. Coming up next, we're talking to Katie Wu about what she saw from Zack Thompson yesterday. Who she agree with, Alex or myself? Are we going to see Zack Thompson at the Cardinals rotation plans for 2024? Katie tells us next here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK. Do you remember that childhood piggy bank that you had, the satisfaction that you felt when you were finally able to reap the rewards of all of those diligent savings? Well, with Truehold, you can access your biggest piggy bank yet, your home's equity. You'll start enjoying that retirement that you plan for right now, and you don't even have to move. Here's how you do it. Truehold will buy your home for its best current value while that value remains high, and you get to bank all the cash now while you continue living in your home for as long as you'd like. Plus, Truehold will cover all the property taxes, insurance, repairs, and maintenance too. And since they pay your home's current value in cash, the money is yours to do whatever you'd like with. So start enjoying your home's equity while it remains high by visiting Truehold.com, and you'll discover how much they'll buy your home for today based on its best current value. Call 1-855-300-9993 or visit Truehold.com for the smarter and faster way to cash out on your home's full value without having to move. That's 1-855-300-9993 or visit Truehold.com. That's Truehold.com.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Cardinals fall to the Rockies yesterday 1-0 as they dropped 2 of 3 to Colorado. They've got today off as they travel to Tampa Bay where they start a 3-game set tomorrow night. 5:40 will be first pitch as Miles Michaelis will take the mound for St. Louis, and Zach Eflin will get the start for the Tampa Bay Rays. The Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff. Find your road trip 24/7 at Londoff.com, LondoffAutoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Happy to go out to the 101 ESPN hotline to be joined by Katie Woo. She's the Cardinals insider for The Athletic, and you can find her on Twitter at Katie J. Woo. Katie, I hope you had a fantastic weekend. How you doing today?
I am good, guys. How are we doing after a rather disappointing homestand?
Gonna disagree. Great homestand. Cardinals saw some good things from the young guys, and they lost a bunch of games. Katie, we have turned the page on 2023. That is now what I'm deeming a success. I'm looking at the MLB draft lottery odds every single day now.
You know, that's really funny because I actually think we as a fan base, as a media group, whatever, should be doing that. And this is uncharted territory, right? We don't know how to handle a losing season to this degree, but it's really hard to look at a box score and see a loss and find it to be a positive. But that's what I saw yesterday with Zack Thompson. So I understand where you're coming from. It's not easy. It doesn't make me happy to say, but it's just the reality of the year.
MLB.com, Katie, says the projected first overall pick in 2024 is Chase Burns, a right-handed pitcher. So I'm starting
report.
I'm starting the.
Oh, here we go.
I'm starting the hashtag Burn It for Burns.
Ooh, burn it down for
Right,
Burns.
yeah.
So let's keep losing, Katie. Hashtag Burn It for Burns.
Katie, we got into a significant disagreement on the show, as we tend to do earlier today, about Zack Thompson, what we saw from him yesterday. What does Zack Thompson's finish to the season mean in terms of his role for 2024?
Wow, you guys disagree, and that's not uncharacteristic at all. I think that's a really good question. One commends Zack Thompson for how he's handled his 2023 season. There has been a lot of mixed messaging in his role specifically, and I know part of that is part of the game, but let's think about it. He spent all of the offseason preparing to be a reliever. He comes and he does a pretty good job, has a couple of starts or appearances in April that aren't great, and he gets sent down to Memphis, and the messaging is, okay, you're going to be in Memphis for the rest of the year, and you're going to be a starting pitcher to compete for 2024. And now he's just kind of back where it all started, where he's that long reliever. He can spot start if possible, and it's been, I think, really hard for Zack to make those adjustments on the fly. With that being said, I think Thompson is absolutely still a candidate to compete for the 2024 rotation. I know yesterday was just one outing, but it was a dominant one, very strong, a lot of good things. We saw that curveball. He was able to spot it up. Fastball command is much better. And let's face it, the Cardinals need many, many options in spring training next year for their rotation. If Zack Thompson can finish strong, I think he's absolutely a contender for that role.
Katie, we've talked a lot about how the Cardinals talked about how they got to change their model for swing and miss stuff. Do you feel like they've got an issue in terms of developing these pitchers with mixed messagings, whether it is Zack Thompson or Matthew Liberatore's gone through it too?
Yes and no. I think that it's really hard when you are a AAA guy on 40-man to have a plan to develop, because something happens on the active roster. Those plans are going to be pushed to the side. That's just the nature of the game. I do think there is a philosophy in the organization that development needs to be changed, especially with those pitchers on the brink of coming to the major leagues, because we've seen a lot of them struggle. And let's be honest. If you're coming from AAA and you're going to the major leagues, you're going to struggle at some point. That is part of the game. But I don't think we've seen what the Cardinals could really get out of Matthew Liberatore. I think we've seen flashes of that in Zack Thompson. At the same time, Andre Palante last year, a success story, and he's more or less about what we expected him to be this year. So I think it just depends on the guy. But when you're looking at those top prospects, maybe it's just the nature that we have as a baseball society in overhyping these young prospects. Just because someone is a top prospect does not mean they're the next Cy Young. There are going to be struggles here, but I do think it's very fair to say the Cardinals need to reevaluate their development at their upper-level minor league system if they really want to incorporate that swing and miss that they've said so clearly that they want to.
Katie, I know after the game on, I think it was Saturday, Adam Wainwright talked a little bit, I guess it was Friday night, about how he doesn't want to have the same conversations with the media after his games that he has had recently. It wasn't good. 3 innings, 9 hits, 7 earned runs, walked a couple. Really, the only way that he was able to get outs early on was with the strikeout ball. He now has a 7.8 ERA on the season. I know they want so desperately to get him to 200 wins, and they want to do that with him as a starter. Is there going to come a point in time in your mind, whether it's based on your reporting or just your own opinion, where it makes more sense for them to try to get him that win out of the bullpen than it does by running him out there every 5th day down the stretch as a starter?
I don't think Adam Wainwright would do that. I don't think Adam Wainwright is there to limp into 200. I don't think he's the type of competitor to be like, yeah, just get me there and let me do the bare minimum of work to get these 2 remaining wins. That means so much to me. I think what I respect so much about Adam is his ability to go out there and try to earn it. And if it doesn't come as a starter, I don't think he's going to be down for let's put me in the bullpen and, maybe we can luck into some wins there. I just can't see him saying that. This is really frustrating and a really disappointing season for Adam Wainwright, especially when you look at his career. I mean, I know the saying is Father Time is undefeated, and there are some rightful questions about the contract that they offered and the amount of responsibility they were putting on Adam. But I don't think anyone would have predicted it being this difficult to watch. And really, when you're watching Wainwright as of late, I do think the stuff looks better. I do think the curveball looks better. He just still has that same problem of not being able to retire batters after 2 outs. I do think the Cardinals are going to give him as much opportunity as possible as a starter to get 200. That means so much to him. That means so much to the organization. Let's face it, the Cardinals aren't really competing except for that draft pick. So I've already forgot the hashtag, but remind me again.
Hashtag burn it for Burns, Katie.
There it is. There we go. But I do think Adam is also the type of competitor and the type of leader where if he just no longer has it, he's not going to say, yeah, take me from the bullpen and we'll luck our way in to win number 200. I just can't see him going for that.
Speaking of the bullpen, Katie, JoJo Romero, he's been very impressive since he's been getting a more advanced role for this Cardinals team since Jordan Hicks has been traded and Helsley still being injured. Can he play his way into the Cards bullpen plans next year in a high leverage role?
Absolutely. I think what you're seeing from a lot of these guys, and definitely JoJo Romero included, is more trust in their stuff, more confidence. You're not seeing JoJo nibble. You're not seeing JoJo go out there and willing to hit the strike zone, almost like you're like fine-tuning your pitches. You are so worried about where your location is that you're trying to will those pitches into location. You're seeing JoJo Romero go out there and confidently trust his stuff that they're going to land and play the way that he wants to. And that's been a big game changer. I mean, look at what's happening with Steven Matz. I think he's an entirely different as well. So there are opportunities as we shift to 2024 right now to see who could possibly be internal options for those roles next year. Now, I want to be very clear. Just have internal options and are doing what they're supposed to be doing for the next 2 months and figuring out what those internal options look like for next year does not mean they cannot go out and not do anything to add externally. The worst thing this team can do is look at their internal options and be like, oh, yeah, we have options. We're good to go. No, you are not. Go find somebody. Go trade for somebody. Go sign for free agents. It sounds like the front office has understood that. I mean, Mo has been on the record and said it multiple times, but I really want to reiterate, just because the Cardinals are experimenting internally with Libby, with Zack Thompson, with JoJo Romero, pick your poison, does not mean they should not be exploring the outside avenues for the offseason, and I think that they will be doing exactly that.
And that apple that you're the poison that you just mentioned, it's a poisoned apple. Like, don't go after that once again. You don't need to go down that path of trusting the internal options anymore. Don't just go get a guy, go get the guy this offseason, finally, for the first time in a long time. All right, we're talking with Katie Woo, Cardinals insider for The Athletic. Katie, I did want to ask you about another internal option, maybe for 2024. Luken Baker is just tearing the cover off of the baseball down in AAA. 31 home runs for the Memphis Redbirds. He has an OPS on the season of over 1,100. It's not easy to find him at bats for this team. He's a first base only guy. He can play DH if you need him to, but he's a right-handed bat on a team that has a whole lot of guys that profile pretty similarly as Luken Baker. Do you think we are going to see him down the stretch get some kind of an opportunity with this team?
Yeah, this is interesting because I was thinking the same thing. One, Luke and Baker rakes. I mean, just an incredible season in AAA, and you're excited about that power. You're excited about what he can do with the bat. At the same time, he is defensively limited, and the Cardinals are in no position to play him right now because you look at this roster and you think, where is he going to play? Now, maybe there's some flexibility now with Donovan out for the season, and there's a shift again in focus for being ready for 2024 where they could call him up. But, they have a starting first baseman, and he happens to be pretty good. So I'm not quite sure where Luke and Baker can fit in. It seems like the Cardinals have a lot of this in the AAA level or those 4A guys who have the bat. They definitely have the bat tool, but there's nowhere to play them. We saw this with Lonnie says and multiple guys. So I'm not sure where Luke and Baker fits in on this active roster. Do I think he's having an incredible season in AAA? Absolutely. Has he earned some playing time at the major league level? Probably. Where that fits in, I don't know yet. I'm not sure the Cardinals know either. Maybe we'll see him closer in September, but I think for now the Cardinals are really trying to figure out, what they have with their team. And, I know this might not be the most believable thing, how the Cardinals games have gone as of late, but the guys on the active roster right now have no intention of losing out the rest of the season. They are actively trying to win every single game. It's just, not really going that way in terms of the box score. So I think there is a message from the organization that just because this is going to be a losing season doesn't mean the Cardinals are going to go out there and intentionally lose the rest of their games, of course. I think they owe it to their fan base. They owe it to the people that buy tickets to put out their best product on the field. I'm not sure where Luke and Baker fits in that just yet.
Katie, the proper answer to Luke and Baker is on another team. He rakes on another team, like Patrick Wisdom.
He's most likely going to be doing that.
Like just to be the next all-star for whoever he's going to get traded to.
He's going to hit 25 home runs and bat like 230 for somebody next year. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying anything against Luke and Baker, but that feels like it's kind of his future.
Hashtag burn it for Burns.
Final question, Katie. We'll get you out of here on this one. Are you willing to talk yourself into Tyler O'Neill again next year?
Oh, man. Okay. At the risk of being caught up in the hype, because I've always believed Tyler O'Neill to be a very high-caliber player when healthy. And, of course, we know that when healthy is carrying a lot of weight. But we all saw what that outfield defense looked like in the first half, and it was not pretty. And there is something so comforting in knowing off the read of the bat, if that ball is going to the left field area in general, you can tell by Tyler O'Neill's first two steps if that ball is going to be caught. And more often than not, it is going to be caught. And it's a breath of fresh air to have that defense back for the Cardinals that they've just truly been lacking all around the diamond. The bat's always going to be what it is, right? He's not going to be a player that hits for average, but he certainly has that power. He has that dynamic speed on the bases. He is a very high-caliber player. And I think finally what Ollie Marmol and Tyler O'Neill are doing and having communication and having rest days, the Cardinals can buy into that and they can get away with that because they have such a versatile team with utility players. That kind of communication only gets better when Brendan Donovan is back next year. So I can buy into it right now. I do think, though, if Tyler O'Neill finishes out with the last 2 months healthy and boosts that trade value, he's certainly in talks to be traded over the offseason. But right now, I'm genuinely enjoying watching Tyler O'Neill play the outfield. It's been a minute since we saw left field handled so confidently there.
And it's been fun. He's playing like the guy that we saw in 2021, and it just makes you wonder, like, where was this earlier in the season? Because even when he was healthy, he wasn't quite the same guy. But that's neither here nor there. Tyler O'Neill will be an interesting candidate for this offseason for sure. Katie, we'll be reading your work over at The Athletic. Thanks for hopping on with us today, as always. Enjoy your trip out to Kansas City later this week, and we'll talk with you again early next week.
Yep, guys, you got it. Talk soon.
Absolutely. That's Katie Wu joining us here on 101 ESPN. So burn it for Burns, huh?
Dude, he was born in Napoli, Italy.
Was he?
Well, I found my new favorite player. Yeah. Chase Burns.
You said he's a pitcher?
He's a pitcher. 6'4", 195 pounds for the Tennessee Volunteers. It's not going so well for him this year.
It's not. That season, I think, is over.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this year it didn't go well.
I'll be sure to watch him
the baseball season has concluded.
4.25 ERA didn't go well.
That's all right. Probably just because of home run ball. He probably got bit by the home run ball.
Well, they gave up 10 of them.
14 strikeouts per 9 innings. Woo! I like that.
I'd say burn it for Burns, boys.
19 years old, a strapping young man.
He and I could be paisans together.
The three of us.
No.
3 best friends.
No. Well, T-Bone could be a part of it.
Yes. I'm more
You pissed me off in the first segment. So.
I know, buddy. I know. Hey, guys, can I just mention Dylan Carlson real quick?
How did he fit in
didn't
here?
even get brought up in the
I
conversation.
just feel like we
man.
haven't talked about him yet. I'm having withdrawals.
Wait, no, I thought we were
I thought we
getting
were talking about him at
I thought we were
1:30.
getting to Karlsson at 1:30.
No, different Karlsson.
Oh.
Erik
He was
Karlsson. We're talking about him at 1:30.
Better Karlsson.
Since June 1st, Dylan Carlson is batting 173 against right-handed pitching.
You really didn't have to bring that up today, and you had to get it out.
I'd say keep playing
Here's
him.
the list of Cardinals that have a better OPS against righties since June 1st. Arenado, Donovan, Nootbaar, Contreras, Walker, Burleson, Goldie, Gorman, Edman, and Paul DeYoung.
You didn't say Mater.
He just doesn't qualify. I'll see where he's at on this, too.
Well, I'd say keep playing him. That's how you burn it for Burns. Hashtag.
He's good defensively, though, man. He's been Mater's been worse.
Oh.
There
Kisner's
it
been
is.
better. Edmund's been better. O'Neill's been better. Yvonne Herrera's been way better.
He doesn't qualify.
He does now that I reduced the qualifications. All right, coming up next, we're diving into the junk drawer here on 101 ESPN.
or on your 101 mobile app.
We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Let's open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trashed wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Let's dive into the junk drawer. T-Bone, what do you got for us today?
So, guys, I saw this on social media last week of someone that was renting a property, renting a home in Australia. But it's one of those where it's like, wouldn't be on social media if it wasn't like a bad story.
Sure.
So, a tenant in Sydney, Australia, discovered her landlord was secretly living in a van outside her rental property and using her home when she was away. The landlord was caught going through the tenant's mail, using her bathroom and kitchen. She has since decided to move out, which seems smart, by the way.
Question, was the van by a river?
I'm sure the home was by a river.
And was
Sure.
In Australia. I'm sure they've got a lot of them.
Matt Foley. So that's who that sounded like.
Dude, this is my worst nightmare. Honestly, my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Is the idea of, because you know how it is, right? Like when you were in high school, you remember how they told you, like, hey, do you have lockers anymore? Did you have lockers
In
when you were in high school?
Yeah.
Okay. This locker is not yours. Anything that you put in here, it can be at any time searched by the school, right? Because they own the property.
Okay, it was a drug dealer now. Going down that path.
Now I know.
Now I know why you were worried.
The same thing is true for your apartment, right, T-Bone? If they ever want to come in, they are free to do so.
Yeah.
So they've got master keys.
Not good for you, man.
Not ideal.
You got things in your apartment.
That's not true. And if you're listening, my apartment.
It's not in your apartment. It's just on the deck. It's fine.
No, it's not. It's my patio set. It's fine.
If ever there was... This is a fear. A great fear that I had when I was living in the apartment is that you've got somebody that works for the apartment complex that is up to no good. And they know what's in your apartment, and they come in and they take it out. Now, I didn't realize that I was also going to have the same issue when I moved into my house, and my patio furniture was up for grabs. My neighbor was going to steal it.
That was
from
outside,
me.
and you didn't chain it down like you should have.
That's on me. Didn't know I had to do that in the middle of
Kids
St.
hanging out
Charles.
on the roof behind you. You should have known that.
But this is a great fear of mine. Genuinely a great fear of mine.
Yeah, I'm always terrified because luckily my apartment complex will send me emails every time they are coming to the apartment or they're like working on something. Like I just had repairs done on my deck. So they send me an email saying, hey, just so you know, if you see a guy on a ladder on your deck, he's supposed to be there. But it's always my biggest fear.
They updated you.
Is like I get an email and then I forget to wake up and I wake up to a guy like just roaming around my apartment.
Sure.
Like the bug man there to spray for
Living
insects.
in an apartment sounds awful. There's a lot of
It is
anxiety.
Alex's worst nightmare.
There's a lot of anxiety going on.
Well, it's just humans that are interacting
the thing
with you.
you would hate the most, because I don't really interact with a ton of people at the apartment complex as a whole. You'd hate going to the community laundry room. Absolutely, Ferrario would despise it.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have done that. I would have either purchased a washing and washer
I
and
don't have
dryer.
a spot for it, so.
Oh, really?
There's no hookup.
Yeah.
Well, my sister had one in an apartment she lived
Some
in.
do.
I was
Some
going to
of them
say,
have.
yeah.
Most, especially around this area.
Otherwise,
we're in Creve Coeur off of Olive. Most of the apartments out here, I think we found like 3 apartment complexes in this
It's
area
tough
that
to
do
find
have
them.
washers.
Otherwise, I'm packing it and going to somebody's house, whether it's a family
Really?
member. I'm not doing laundry in a community laundry area.
I thought
Have you
about
ever
that.
lived in an area where you had to do communal?
No.
Oh, we lived in an apartment for a year. I said the number one thing that I'm looking for. In
I
our
always
next
lived at
apartment
home.
complex
I lived-
is having a washer dryer.
I lived at home, and then I didn't live on campus, so I lived at home all the way up until I bought the house with my wife.
If I hadn't just gotten a new car, I would be looking at an apartment with a place to do my own laundry because I hate going to the community
Would there be
area.
anything worse than finding, like, you come home and then, like, just finding, like, a deuce in your toilet and not being known what's going on? Because that would be my worst nightmare. Somebody's coming in and using my toilet.
I think my worst nightmare would be opening the door going, who the hell are you?
well,
that would be
not
my worst
mid-bathroom.
nightmare.
That would be a little frightening.
No, just anywhere in my apartment.
It's wild to me, though, that, like, people in an apartment would do that because at any moment, like, if you break in and somebody's there, like, you don't know who's behind that door.
Somebody on the text line asks an interesting question. Somebody stole my lawnmower from my backyard when I rented a house in South St. Louis. What are the most common things that are stolen from a house?
Dude, lawnmower. I'm assuming it was a push mower. That's wild.
They didn't drive off on it. You don't
Well, I
think?
mean, you never know.
Oh, no, he's getting away.
I guess it depends on what time they robbed you of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't think patio furniture would actually be that high on that list now that I think
like
about it.
A barbecue pit.
I would think barbecue pit, grill.
Stuff that's outside that's easy to get to.
But I wouldn't think like a patio set.
Maybe not a
that big.
patio set, but like a chair. Like I could see somebody stealing, like, because we have one of those like swings. We have one of
I
those.
feel like that was rare. I've never heard of that until I knew you. That someone's stealing a patio chair.
We have one of those like swings that.
A swing I could see being
like
stolen.
that would make
Somebody
sense.
said a bike got stolen from them. I could totally see that.
Yeah.
Like a bicycle that's sitting outside.
Yeah, why can't somebody just break into my backyard and like want to steal something, but instead just pick up dog poop? Be easier to do that.
Are you banging something on the table?
Oh, man. Sorry. I was like, what is he looking for?
All I hear is T-Bone going just repeatedly during the middle of this segment.
I was thinking. I was processing.
Someone asked if I was offering Tanner to come over and do laundry at my house. No, sorry.
Oh,
man.
yeah, that'd be great. Can I?
That comes with a price. What? Is he still doing it? Get rid of the damn pen, man.
Fine. Here, somebody take that away from me.
Get rid of the damn pen. No, you can do the laundry in my house, but
Okay.
it comes with a price.
I'll cut your lawn if I get to do laundry.
Okay. Welcome over, buddy.
Nice.
I'll even let you sleep in my basement.
You're kind of far away. BK, can I have that offer at your house?
What was it?
I get to go and do my laundry at your place.
Sure, man. You're always welcome.
Nice.
Coming up next, speaking of always welcome, Tyler O'Neill. Is he welcomed in the Cardinals lineup next year? Talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
From the opening drive, the balloon party.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my insurance agent. She is Tracy Bibb, her team out at Allstate. Phenomenal when it comes to your home and car insurance. And look, you want to make sure that both have the proper coverage, specifically when it comes to your home. We know we've been getting all of these storms. I had actually a tree fall down in my backyard last week during the storms, and it landed on top of my shed. Now, luckily, it wasn't massive damage, but if it was, Tracy was who I was calling first because she's able to walk you through what that entails, how to get that handled, and when there is damage, how to get it fixed. Tracy's always on top of this, communicating with her clients, a matter of if something happens, not when it happens, and when it does, she's there to help fix whatever that is. So give her a call today. Tell her you heard me talk about it on 101 ESPN, and Tracy will walk you through the rest. A free and easy non-committal quote by calling her at 314-328-4260. Again, tell Tracy Alex Ferrario sent you, and she'll get you switched over. 314-328-4260. It's no fib. You're always in great hands with the Bib.
He's Alex Ferrario. That's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Guys, Tyler O'Neill is playing like the guy that we saw in 2021. Since his return from the injured list, by the way, that audio courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest, he's batting .285. He's getting on base almost 40% of the time, and he's still slugging. A .525 slugging percentage. Got 4 doubles, 3 home runs in his last 15 games. Tyler O'Neill still playing great defense in left field, and even his season numbers now are back up right around league average offensively. We've seen this before. Tyler O'Neill has really dragged us through the gauntlet, man. We have been in this, I don't even know what to call it, an arranged marriage that has not gone according to plans since 2018. It's been a whole lot of injuries, whole lot of ups and downs. Even when he's been healthy, he has not always performed up to expectations. Alex, if he continues playing the rest of the way that he has since his return from the injured list, are you willing to explore the idea of Tyler O'Neill being in your outfield again in 2024?
Sure, but what are my other options? Because that's what I'm going to ask myself if I'm the Cardinals. If Tyler O'Neill performs well the rest of the way, great. The idea of Tyler O'Neill would be awesome. But what are my other options to upgrade over him? And what's my emergency backup plan? Like, I have to have this list before I can buy back into Tyler O'Neill.
All right, let's go down this path. You're not upgrading from Tyler O'Neill.
Okay.
I don't think the Cardinals are adding a position player this offseason. Like, just full stop. I don't think they're signing anybody.
Unless he gets connected into the trade for a starter.
Sure, maybe they add like a backup center fielder. I could see them maybe going that path, right? Where they sign somebody that they think is just a glove first player that they expect to play like once a week, maybe. Maybe they end up doing that if they trade some of these guys from their current roster. So, but that's about as much as I expect them to do. So you're not upgrading from O'Neill. It's just internal options.
What are my emergency plans for the internal options then?
Terms of if he gets
Tyler
hurt,
O'Neill is out for 60-plus games in a season, let's be real. When Tyler O'Neill is out for 60-plus games, what are my emergency options?
Depends what they do on the trade market, but let's assume they trade one of their guys internally, right? Whether that's Nolan Gorman, Alec Burleson, Lars, somebody. They trade a bat this offseason for a pitcher. You're probably looking at one of Brendan Donovan, maybe Dylan Carlson, Lars Nootbaar. It's kind of hard to know exactly, and maybe Alec Burleson would be thrown in there as well.
So this is
similar to what it was this year.
The reason I'm asking these questions is if I know, so I'm taking this as I'm the Cardinals, John Mozeliak in the front office. If I know that there are no other options that I can afford to upgrade over Tyler O'Neill, either via free agency because all that money's going to be going to pitching, or in a trade because that's going to be pitching. So now it's Tyler O'Neill, but I got to make sure my you-know-what is covered. And if my options to cover that are Alec Burleson, Tommy Edman, Brendan Donovan, that's great. But what does that do to other positions, and what does that do with my depth? So I guess this is a long way of saying, yeah, I'm fine with it, but I think you need to know going into it, you're going to be bleeped if you stick with him, because I can't rely on him to be available for 120 games. And if he's not there for me, I'm going to go through the same trials and tribulations that I did this season of, okay, well, who's replacing him? Defensively, can that help there? Offensively, where's that big back going to come from? If that player is playing in the outfield, now what position is open up, and can I trust that person? There's a trickle-down effect that I need to know I'm going to probably be bleeped if I do.
Yeah, I think it's okay to stick with him. I mean, I would want, if he plays well down the stretch, and again, this is like worst case scenario, things don't go right again next year, you're looking to trade him because you can't rely on him for 162 games, let alone I don't think you could have any sort of idea what you project his stats to look like when you pencil him in as a starter. But yes, I think they can go into next year with him in left field and be prepared for, like Alex said, those 60 games that he's probably going to miss due to injury. And I think you just fill that with a combination of Burleson, Donovan, maybe I think he's probably too far away. Maybe Victor Scott can come up and go into center field, and you push Lars Nootbaar into a corner. Like I think there are scenarios where, yes, they should be fine in terms of filling it by putting Burleson's bat out there, finding a defensive substitution late in games. I mean, they can always go get someone like a Mercado that can be brought in on a minor league deal that in this scenario gets called up for defensive purposes for late in games, because Burleson probably becomes the starting left fielder in that scenario, and then you can pull him out and put somebody else out there in left field. So I don't mind it, but you got to go into it with that good backup plan to where if you are keeping O'Neill, Burleson probably does become an untouchable, in my opinion, this offseason, because he is the guy that is the backup plan if Tyler O'Neill is the left fielder, because of those 60 games that we're talking about where you got a plan where he's not going to be healthy.
I think Burleson makes a lot of sense on this roster next year, honestly, because he's a backup plan for Paul Goldschmidt when his back kind of flares up on him, because at this point that's something that just happens with Goldie, and we know once a week he's going to be at a DH spot anyway, so you want somebody that can play that first base spot capably. We've seen what happens when the defense goes awry there. I think Burleson's done a pretty good job at first whenever he's had the opportunity so far this year. You've got Gorman, you've got Donovan, you've got Edman who can play second base for you when necessary. You'll have Wynn and Edman who can split some time at shortstop, Wynn obviously being the starter, and Edman can replace him when needed. And then in the outfield, in this scenario, you've got Nootbaar, Walker, O'Neill, Burleson, and Edman who can all take reps out there. So you got 5 capable outfielders with 4 of them getting regular playing time out there.
So that means you're trading one of Donovan or Gorman this offseason.
I think it means you're trading Karlsson. I think this is a scenario. This is a scenario that we should keep in mind going into the offseason, and it requires them to do something they've never done before. So I don't know that it's likely to happen. But guys, what if they were willing to spend on their number 1 and number 2 starters, and then they traded for a guy that was a number 4 starter? Like, if you could get whoever this offseason's version of Aaron Savali is for Dylan Carlson, I would probably do that. Now, Savali, don't look at his ERA from this season. It looks like he's a different pitcher than he actually is. The majority of his career, he's been a solid number 4, maybe you could argue number 3. I think you might be able to get somebody like that for Dylan Carlson going into this offseason, because somebody else could look at him as a starting everyday center fielder with upside. 24 years old. We've seen it in the past. He could be a really good player for you. Will I trade a number 4 starter for that? Sure. Yeah, I absolutely would. So I could see how that would work out. And then you've still got all of those options we just mentioned. And in that scenario, yeah, you have the upside of Tyler O'Neill baked in. That's how I would talk myself into it. The problem is, like, if you do this, it does require you to keep some of that depth in the outfield. And like, I think Donovan is you cannot touch him if you trade or if you keep Tyler O'Neill. Because Donovan, I think, can be an everyday outfielder if needed. I don't know if I want to spend via free agency for 2 pitchers, just because, like, I love the idea of a Nola and a Snell, and it would be awesome, but it seems like I mean, we've already talked about how all of them kind of make us a little nervous, and do I really want my 1s and 2s to be the guys that I paid big money to in free agency? Because if it doesn't work out, you're stuck with that for the next 5+ years, whereas if I only spend it on 1 and make that big trade to get that young, cost-controlled pitcher from someone, at least I know I have that to take over for that 1 if he gets injured. You do, but you also don't now have the position player that you traded. And that's where it gets really hard, is like, do I want to trade? This is something that I think I'm going to look in for the show tomorrow, because I want to explore what you're talking about there, Alex, because I think there's legitimate validity to it. I think that's the most likely route that the Cardinals take this offseason. If I trade one of those superstar position players for a stud young starting pitcher, what is the likelihood that they remain that stud young pitcher? Because, like, pitching breaks, A, in terms of injuries, and B, it's just erratic, man. Look at some of the guys that were the best pitchers in Major League Baseball last year, and look at where they're at this year. Sandy Alcantara is the perfect example of this. I don't think Sandy's just going to be bad now, but Sandy's a mid-rotation starter on a really good team this year with his results that he's given you so far. And I would have traded everything for that guy as recently as last year. So it just becomes a question of, like, are you giving up something that you'll never be able to really reach that same peak? If you give up Nolan Gorman for a starter, how good does that starter have to be to make up for the fact that you just gave up a young, cost-controlled, 23-year-old second baseman who can hit 40 bombs a year? If you give up Brendan Donovan, how good does that starting pitcher have to be in order to make up for the fact that you gave up a young, cost-controlled position player who can play anywhere on the diamond, give you plus defense at that spot, and gets on base 38% of the time with 15 to 20 home runs every single season? Pretty good, man. You're going to have to get a really good starter consistently for that guy. And I just don't know if you're going to be able to get that in return. So maybe it makes more sense to spend on the upside starters and then trade cost-controlled position player in Dylan Carlson, who doesn't have a role in your team next year, for a solid but unspectacular number 4 starter. I just don't know if the trade value's there for a guy like that. Like, I mean, don't you think if the Cardinals could have gotten that at the trade deadline, they would have pulled the trigger on it? They kept saying we want more than what people were offering for Dylan Carlson. I think it changes in the offseason. I think some of the teams that they'll be able to have conversations about this with in the offseason, they can then replace that 4th starter with somebody on the market, right? Whoever this year's version of like a John Gray or a Andrew Heaney are. You can go get those guys on the free agency market. It costs you a little bit more money, but now I've spent, in terms of trading away capital from my rotation, brought in a starter in my outfield, and now I can go spend $8 million on the starting pitcher to replace my number 4 starter.
I mean, I understand where you're coming from with it, but man, if one of the Mariners or Marlins are willing to move on from one of these young, cost-controlled pitchers that has a high upside, I can't sit here and say, no, I can't deal from an area of strength that I have with all of this offense and all these position players, because I've had that area of strength for the last couple of seasons, and it hasn't got me very far.
Unless I'm willing to spend. Unless I'm willing to spend, though, that's where it does change things.
Like, if you want to go get Blake Snell and Urias, go for it. I just don't know if they will.
But here's what I think the version of spending is, and this is how I was operating under this. And I don't think they would spend for their 1 and 2 in terms of going high like that. I'm
being serious. Like, why not?
I can't tell you why not, because I would do it. But that's a conversation for ownership and Mozeliak on why not. But just going off of presence way that they've acted, my guess is their version of that big spending where you're talking about where you trade Karlsson for a 4. I think instead of spending on the 1 and 2, maybe they spend on the 1 and the 3 and hope Michaelis plays up as the 2.
I think the most likely outcome for the offseason is they sign a number 1, or what they believe will be a number 1. So Urias, Nola, Snell, one of those guys, Giolito maybe. They'll sign one of the top end starters for $25 million a year. They'll trade for who they deem to be a number 2. And then they'll sign a number 4, like a James Paxton, or they'll get Jose Quintana back, something like that.
Aren't you still in the same issue that you're in now, though, where you have all of these guys and you're not sure how to get the playing time for all of them?
Well, in my scenario, I'm talking about trading for that number 2, so one of the Mariners players.
Okay. I got you.
So you ended up trading a significant piece. But to answer your question, I don't think that the Cardinals actually have that big of an issue next year with that. Like, once you get rid of Dylan Carlson, who's the guy that you think you need to see?
I don't think
you need to find out what they are.
I don't think they have a problem with that if they actually claim certain guys to be bench bats. And I don't think the Cardinals would do that with Tommy Edman.
Like, next year, Tommy Edman should be a bench bat for this team.
I don't think they would do that, though.
Absolutely should be a bench bat for you. He can be a versatile piece that defensively he replaces guys late in a game if you need him to, but he's not starting at shortstop for me over Mason Wynn. He's not starting at second for me over Nolan Gorman, and he's not starting in the outfield for me over Nootbaar, Walker, O'Neill.
He might be a bat that starts against lefties. Play him at DH maybe. Like, or second base.
You can even start him, yeah.
Yeah, and Donovan becomes a DH if you trust him against lefties, which I think the Cardinals do. Yeah, but I think they trust Nootbaar, and I'm just operating under him being the center fielder.
Sure.
So again, you just put Edman as, whether it be DH, second baseman, center field, DH the other guy. Like, there is a role for him. It's just against lefties.
Put him at second, DH Gorman.
Yeah.
Against lefties.
Or DH Donovan. That's what I was
You're basically also telling Donovan and Burleson, albeit that health is there at the beginning of the season, Donovan and Burleson are DH/bench bats.
I think Donovan also will get opportunities all across the diamond. I think it's easier to do this than people are giving it credit for. The problem for the Cardinals this year was not that they had too many guys. It was at times. It was that the guys that they were playing weren't producing. And when you get into those scenarios where guys aren't producing, now you're just chasing your tail. We saw this with Mike Matheny, where a guy would strike out twice. Randall Grichuk, Colton Wong immediately come to mind for me, and they wouldn't be in the lineup the next day. Well, the Cardinals were doing that because they were searching, they were craving any sort of production from their lineup early in the season, and they weren't getting it. And let's be honest, guys, Tommy Edman has never really gotten back on track offensively this year. Dylan Carlson has never really gotten back on track offensively so far this year. Tyler O'Neill was that way early on in the season. That's the risk with Tyler, really, is he goes back early next year to the same guy that he was this year, and then what do you do? And that's why the answer is probably you cash out. You cash out at the end of the season on this hot streak that he's on right now, and you live with it. You live with the fact that he's probably going to go on next year to make an all-star game.
Yeah. That's why I was screaming cash out this past offseason. I thought there was no chance we'd see Tyler O'Neill in a Cardinal uniform coming into this year, because I thought they'd learn the lesson and go, all right, let's sell high while we still can. And
that defensive left is real. I think the defense is what they're going to have to dream on, or what they're going to have to consider. What does that defense do for you in left field compared to what you're likely to play? Because you got a big negative in right.
Yeah, and I think unlike in previous years, a couple of years ago, I mean, you can legitimately say you've got, 5 bats that you can, even if he doesn't hit, maybe even 6 that you can look at and go, yeah, we can hit Tyler O'Neill 7th. We don't have to rely on him hitting, I think he hit 3rd on opening day. We don't have to rely on his bat to be one of those middle-of-the-order bats. We put him at 7 or 8, and you play him in the role DeYoung was. Where it's like, hey, the offense, if he hits 20 home runs, that's great. Even if it is a 220 average. Who cares? We're hitting him at the 8th spot in our lineup. We'll take 20 home runs from the 8th spot in our lineup. And we also get a Gold Glover in left field.
So go out there and sign Urias and Blake Snell. Let's go ahead and add Shohei Ohtani in there as well.
Now who's
great team next year. Now you can trade Tyler O'Neill.
Now who's convincing themselves and falling for what the Cardinals have done in the past?
Coming up next, let's play a game of in or out. You give us a scenario. We'll tell you if we are in or out next year on 101 ESPN.
As we head closer to fall and you're spending more and more time outside, that means you're going to be staring at the exterior of your house a little bit more. And look, you might look at the exterior of your house and think, boy, does that look worn down. The paint's chipping off. You've got water stains on the side. I had this on my house where it just looked worn down. The paint was a little bit out of date, and I needed a new look. That's when I called Darren with Rhino Shield. And let me tell you, changed the entire outlook of our home. First of all, Darren was incredible to work with because we called him out. He was out there the next morning and gave us advice on what he thought would look best, which was huge, but he also walked with my wife through what would look best on our exterior and did it. His team was out that next weekend, got the job done, and now we are in love with our home. But the better part about it is it's a 25-year transferable warranty. So with Rhino Shield, you set it and forget it. You know you're taken care of. It's got the coating of a Rhino. It gives that instant curb appeal. It's 100% waterproof. It deflects 90% of the UV rays. It cures 8 to 10 times thicker than any paint that you think you can have success with. So give Darren a call today. Have him come out and fall in love with the work that Rhino Shield does with their home. 877-25-RHINO. That's 877-25RHINO.com.
Live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Come on, man. Are you in or are you out? It's in or out with BK and Ferrario. Brought to you by Train Heating and Cooling. Visit traininfo.com. It's hard to stop a train.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. For in or out, you give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are in or out on it. Guys, let's start out with this. This comes from the text line. In or out? What?
What was that squeak? Did you just try and sing after me?
No, I don't know what
talking
that
about
was.
this?
It might have been. Yeah, that's what it was.
I was going to say, did somebody toot on
My
there?
microphone's
I
doing
heard
some
something
weird
too.
stuff today, man.
Yeah, sure, the microphone.
Guys, in or out? BK never admits that he's wrong on a player or a player let me ask this.
And you could have stopped at BK never admits he's wrong.
Yeah.
BK is never wrong about a player, or a player proves that he is more than what BK pegs him for, and he's never willing to admit it.
And
Do you know how many times I've said that I'm wrong about a player?
And
not enough.
yeah.
I'm wrong all the time. All the time.
Said Barbie would never do what he did again, and look at him in the playoffs.
Oh, Barbershop. I thought you were talking.
Well, the movie too. Well, the movie too.
What do you say about the Barbie?
Wait, what did I
Well, he
say
also
about it?
doesn't want spoilers for the Barbie movie. Like, he doesn't know how it's going to end.
Yeah, okay. Can we talk about that for a second?
No, we're in or out.
Brooke was in the wrong for what she did
She
earlier
didn't
today.
spoil anything.
Spoil it?
Because I said something, I stopped her.
What do you want to not spoil in the Barbie movie?
I don't know what the ending is. It
Barbie
could've been
cheat on
something
Ken?
serious.
Is that what you don't want to spoil?
Well, that would be a horrible way to end that movie.
I don't know, man.
So we're in the office. Morning show does all of their prep for the next day while we're getting ready for our show. And Brooke is talking with the intern Millsy, and she's talking about the Barbie movie. They're going back and forth, and Brooke says, well, what about the ending? What do you think about the ending? And he says, whatever. And she said, she was about to go into what the ending was. I said, hey, cut it out. I don't want any spoilers over here.
I mean, to be fair,
I think she was in the wrong.
Hadn't the movie been out for what now? 3 weeks?
Yeah, if you don't want spoilers, go see it
While
when
it's
it
in
comes
the
out.
theaters, you shouldn't be able to give out spoilers.
I think at this point, if you
You
haven't
got a
seen
week's
it,
grace period. If you don't
Yeah.
see it within a week, you got to go
Yeah,
before
that's kinda
spoilers.
right.
I disagree.
That's how Marvel was. People are like, no, it's not spoilers. It's been out for 3 weeks. If you haven't
Yeah.
seen it yet, that's on you.
I think
Once
this
it's
is about
streaming,
where
I think
No.
once it's
No, no.
streaming,
No, that's
then
like 2 months. You're making
Yeah.
people not talk about a movie they
No.
wouldn't see
Yeah.
for 2 months?
100%.
In or out? You're crazy.
he's
In.
crazy.
You're crazy.
I'm crazy, but not because of this.
You're crazy. You know
this
what was
is,
also crazy?
This puts you over the top.
Because I'm good at eavesdropping. Millsy doesn't think Margot Robbie's attractive.
Really?
You didn't hear that?
That is
I didn't
way
hear
worse
that.
than any take I've had.
Yeah, that's bad. Because I think they said, I think Rockio said it, like, if Margot Robbie's in it, you know guys are going to go see it. And Millsy's like, no, not me. And I'm like, Millsy. I mean, everybody has their own cup of tea, you know?
No, not on this one. I'm not giving him that out. There is no explanation for that take.
There's no explanation for you whining about spoilers 2 weeks after a movie's been
yeah,
out.
I'm in on that. Like, come on, man.
I had a buddy who did that with Marvel.
I'm not waiting 3 months to talk about the movie
With
because
the-
you didn't go see it.
With Avengers Endgame, I had a buddy who was like, no, don't tell. And dude, it's been out for a month. Like, that's on you.
No, I disagree with
No,
you on this.
you're wrong.
What about TV shows? What's your spoiler alert?
Someone said it's a movie about a damn doll, BK.
Yeah, man. You never know what the ending's gonna be.
Don't want to spoil. That's like saying I don't want to be spoiled on the Oppenheimer.
Well, I mean, that's a little different. I feel like we kind of know what the ending is there.
Right, Tanner?
We successfully built a bomb.
What? What happened then?
Well,
Yeah.
didn't go well for my boy Oppenheimer.
Yeah, it never works
All right,
out
Alex,
well.
what do you got for
In
or
or out, we need to see more of Tim Anderson and Jose Ramirez battles in baseball.
in. T-Bone,
Dude.
can you get the play-by-play of that?
Tim Anderson has been in fights before for how much he got into his stance immediately. My boy's been in some fights.
Is it better or worse if he's been in a fight before?
Well-
Because it didn't go well for him.
Well, let's be honest.
Worse.
Jose Ramirez got him with the desperation haymaker. That wasn't a strategic haymaker. He was going down and he took Tim Anderson with him.
All right, let's take a listen to the Cleveland call of the hit. I'm going to call it the hit by Jose Ramirez.
Head first slide, safe, and in to score is Jimenez. And another hustle double. Right over the bag at first. Now Jose and Anderson square off. They're fighting. They're swinging. Down goes Anderson. Down goes Anderson. Jose never gets upset about anything. They came up chewing. Anderson squared off. Hosey decked him. And Tim Anderson was on the wrong side of that punch.
Watch the video. Jose Ramirez had his head down and just threw a right hook haymaker, not looking and connected.
Hey, they don't ask how.
By the way, also, props to that umpire. Did you see how fast my boy bolted out of that
He was
fight?
out. He was like, all right, fine. Not my problem. It's on you guys.
You two handle it.
He saw them drop the gloves, and he was like, all right, cool. That's all you. Whatever. I'm not getting in the middle of this.
Tim Anderson square up and said, nope, we're good. We good.
In or out, that'll be the moments you remember the most from the regular season in 2023.
Oh, and that just made Tim Anderson a household name like Rougned Odor for the rest of his career.
I don't know why that would make Tim Anderson the one that people
I'm telling
remember.
you, dude, it was
I feel like that's the moment.
He's the one who took the blow.
Well, yeah, he was the one that took the blow, but also because of his stance. That stance was incredible.
I would say this is going to be remembered for Jose Ramirez. He dropped a dude at second base when he had no interest in fighting until like it was necessary for him.
You, it was a
Yeah, but I think Jose
desperation
Ramirez
throw.
is always going to have numbers to back up his play.
Tim Anderson will be in the fight.
Anderson, that guy's hit one home run this year. Like, he's slowly declining into an abyss.
Do people remember Rougned Odor or Jose Bautista?
Odor.
Yes, he was the one that punched him.
I know, but what I'm
Bautista-
saying is, like, if Bautista was in the, you flip those numbers of those guys.
Yeah, Bautista was a
would always
household
be the
name.
one remembered.
Tim Anderson, here we go, in or out. Tim Anderson will be more known for that fight than his home run at the Field of Dreams game.
I forgot he hit the
for
home
sure.
run, so I'm in.
Yes. I have no recollection of that moment until you just said it. That's fair. I would feel like there's a decent percentage of like non-hardcore baseball fans that aren't super familiar with Jose Ramirez.
Also, Tim Anderson, he got bullied by a bunch of like 5 dudes. He stood his ground before all of those White Sox players jumped in, and then he couldn't get a hold of Ramirez.
As we know, they don't have good culture in Chicago.
Very true. They got a good fight culture, though.
Somebody on the text line makes a really good point. The play-by-play of that, which will be remembered.
Well, of course.
Down goes Anderson will make him one that is remembered.
Yeah, because it was
That's
the
a
Indians
total
broadcaster, or the Guardians broadcaster. Of course it's going to be that way. Let's hear the White Sox side of it.
I wasn't as good, so I don't want to play it.
We'll see. Here we go.
Tim Anderson, he did get jacked.
He got rocked.
My man's jaw is fragile.
T-Bone, what do you got for us today on In or Out?
Guys, in or out? Adam Wainwright will get to 200 wins this season.
Out. You know what it's going to be? It's going to be 199 in his final start of the year, and somebody's going to blow that win for him.
So I'm going to the last game of the season on October 1st against Cincinnati. I'll tell you what's
Why'd
going to
you
happen.
do that to yourself?
Wow, now
It'll be
you know
Luka's
he's not
first
getting
ever
it.
baseball game.
Oh, okay.
Oh, does Luka outweigh the BKO?
No, nobody does that.
Here's born into it.
Waino's probably going to start that day. It's the last game of the season. It's at home. I would imagine that's something ceremonial that the Cardinals would do. An October start for
Starts on
Waino.
2 days rest.
He's going to start. He's going to go like 6 innings against the Cincinnati Reds.
BK's going to be out of dinner and late to the game.
2 earned runs. Cardinals are going to be up 4-2 in the 8th.
Man, you don't believe what you're saying.
And the Reds are going to hit a walk-off home run.
Who's the guy that blows it
Wait,
for Waino?
I have a question. How can they hit a walk-off when they're here in St.
That's a
Louis?
good point. They're going to hit a home run in the top of the ninth.
Hey, who blows it? Who blows it for Waino?
T-Bone with the semantics that were totally fair.
Who blows it for the 200th win? Because that player won't be on the Cardinals next season.
JoJo.
Zack Thompson.
No, come on. He's a starter.
He's the new Dylan Carlson.
Coming up next.
Drops the ball.
Speaking of Karlsson, Erik is the one that I want to talk about next. The trade that we saw over the weekend, that is the one glimmer of hope that you should have if you're a Blues fan as to how you can get rid of this player from your roster. We'll tell you who that is next here on 101 ESPN.
Anderson square off. They're fighting. They're swinging. Down goes Anderson. Down goes Anderson.
Coverage of 101 ESPN is presented by Under
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Cardinals fell to the Rockies yesterday 1-0 as they dropped 2 of 3 to Colorado. They are off today as they travel to Tampa Bay, where they'll start a 3-game set against the Rays tomorrow night. 5:40 will be first pitch as Miles Michaels gets the start for St. Louis, and Zach Eflin will be on the mound for the Tampa Bay Rays. The Sports Center update was brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
Louis Sports Picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Erik Karlsson was the big name that was moved over the weekend. He is the newest Pittsburgh Penguin, and a move that, honestly, it makes sense for the Penguins. You got to bet on the upside of Karlsson. This reminds me a lot of what we talked about on Friday, Alex, where the Washington Capitals are talking themselves into keeping the core there in Washington. Because what else are you going to do? You got one of the best players to ever live. Go ahead and keep running this thing back. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, hey, we have very little flexibility. Erik Karlsson was a Norris Trophy winner. Let's go ahead and trade for him. If it works out, great. If not, well, we've got Sidney Crosby. People are going to come watch our games anyways. So Erik Karlsson ends up getting dealt. And Alex, the San Jose Sharks did not have to retain a bunch of salary here. This wasn't like a 50% retention type of thing. They were able to get a perfectly adequate return. Nothing sexy, but a return where they get him off of the books, basically was what this amounted to. The reason I bring this up is because here in St. Louis, the Blues have a player in Torey Krug that they would really like to get off of the books in future years. But there's not a whole lot of teams that want him. Philly did, but then he said, I don't want to go there. So when you look at why this matters in St. Louis, it's because Erik Karlsson's 4 years prior to 2023 and Torey Krug's 4 years prior to the upcoming season are remarkably similar, dude. Erik Karlsson from 2018 to 2022 played 210 games. Over the last 4 years, Torey Krug's played 240 games. Erik Karlsson in that stretch, 27 goals. Krug, 29 goals. Erik Karlsson, 142 points. Torey Krug, 156 points. Now, if you're looking at the on-ice plus-minus, Karlsson was a minus 41. Torey Krug's actually been a positive over the last 4 seasons. You can make a pretty good case. Torey Krug over the last 4 years has been better than Karlsson was prior to this past season when he had 100 points and then ended up, of course, winning the Norris Trophy. Alex, if you see a bounce-back season from Torey Krug this year, I think you'll see a market that actually starts to appear in the offseason where they can finally move on from that money and try to alleviate some of the issues that they've had cap-wise going into next offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to have to put up points, though, if you're Torey Krug. You're going to have a career year if you're going to want that market to really heat up, because the unfortunate part for Torey Krug is he's just not the type of offensive player that Erik Karlsson is. I mean, Erik Karlsson's a guy who's hit 80 points multiple times. Torey Krug is one of the best power play defensemen out there, but when it gets to 5-on-5 play, it's just not there for him. But to go down that path, absolutely. If Torey Krug has himself a really good year, everybody's calling, because what people want is they want power play quarterbacks, they want offensive defensemen, and they want guys who can exit the zone well. That's what Erik Karlsson was. Cal Dubas was talking today, and he basically said that their coach Mike Sullivan went to him in the offseason and said, hey, we need to get better with our exits out of our defensive zone. And Dubas said, okay, I'll go get Erik Karlsson. So that's what you have to be if you're going to be that offensive defenseman that teams want. The tough part for Torey Krug in this situation is you're not going to solely be an offensive defenseman this year. Like, Erik Karlsson's a guy that plays 25-plus minutes a night, but you know what you're getting with that. You're getting a terrible defensive player. Basically, he doesn't even play defense. He just stays in the offensive zone.
He's an extra forward.
Torey Krug is playing on a team that needs him to play defense, and that's going to be the tough part for him to get that season turned around. He could do it. He's had great years with the Blues. It's just you're going to have to be able to do both sides of the ice well to up that ante.
I would also say this, though, like, he's not going to have an Erik Karlsson season because he's not Erik Karlsson. Karlsson is one of the very few defensemen in the NHL capable of posting 100 points. He also doesn't need to, because Karlsson was making $11.5 million. Torey Krug's making $6.5 million. The expectations for a team, like, let's say the Blues end up having to retain 10, 15%, whatever, of his salary. So the team that is acquiring him is getting him at $5.5 to $6 million per year over the next few seasons. Man, that's a perfectly reasonable value if Torey Krug stays healthy this season and produces on the power play. If he can do those two things, first of all, the Blues might just convince themselves, hey, this is the best guy for us long term. But secondarily, other teams around the league, I think will look at Torey Krug and say, hey, where else are we finding that? Where else can we find a 40 to 50 point producer on an annual basis that can come in, run our power play unit from day one, is a total pro. The guy is liked in the locker room, causes no issues whatsoever, works his ass off. And oh, by the way, we're getting him at $5.5 million for the next few years. You're not getting that on the free agent market, man. So the biggest thing is just health. The biggest change for Erik Karlsson this year was A, healthy, and B, finally produced. And when he combined those two things, we saw what he's been capable of his entire NHL career. We could see that again this year for Torey Krug as well.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I would argue that if Torey Krug has this type of year, a renaissance year of back to who he was, the Blues shouldn't trade him because, frankly, they need that type of Torey Krug. That's who they had his first season with the Blues, and it was very good for him. It just hasn't gone that way right now. But he will be the focus for a lot of people at least the start of the season, because if health is there, you're talking about a 60, 65 point player who changes that power play. But then you get to the interesting part, because then it becomes internal competition. Does Scott Perunovich perform well? Because if Perunovich performs well and Krug performs well, I don't think you're keeping both of them.
All right, we did get a bunch of these texts. Krug has a no-trade clause, guys. Hey, dummy, Torey has a no-trade clause. You guys are assuming Torey Krug will waive his no-trade clause.
Yeah, and Karlsson had a no-movement clause. And those are harder to move because they say no move.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. Torey Krug had a no-trade clause, and he decided this offseason the one team that wanted him that is going into a full-blown rebuild.
Yeah.
Tore down everything, and that was the only reason why they were willing to take on Torey Krug in the first place, was because they were willing to get rid of a big contract that they didn't want for 8 years for a similar contract for fewer years that they could go ahead and they could find a way to work with it. Yeah, if he's really good, I think a team like Miami or the Florida Panthers might be interested in him.
Yeah, if you would have taken out Philadelphia,
might be interested in him.
Like, would have taken out Philadelphia's name and put Boston there in the offseason, Torey Krug wouldn't be a Blue right now.
Exactly. So do I think that he'd be willing to accept a deal to a better team? Maybe. You at least find out. And now you've got a new path to be able to move forward in the non-Torey Krug era of St. Louis Blues hockey. Karlsson's deal over the weekend showed you what that can look like. The first thing that has to happen is Torey Krug stays healthy. The second thing is that he's productive, and then the Blues have the decision that they need to make. Do you want to keep him around? As Alex mentioned, maybe that ends up being the best option for them. Or do you want to look at his market? Clearly there is one for a point-producing defenseman that has some liabilities defensively. We just saw it over the weekend. Coming up next, we'll hit the rewind here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK. For all of my men out there, I need you to write this down somewhere safe. VictoryRx.com. That's VictoryRx.com. That's going to be the new site that you need to go to get prescribed your ED medication. Victory Men's Health has launched that new site. It's a telehealth site. It's called VictoryRx. Man, you can get prescribed your ED medication over there, and it is super easy to do. They're going to do your entire consult all via text. They've already treated thousands of men in their standalone locations throughout the area. And now, regardless of where you're listening from right now, you can get access to that #1 selling ED medication. It's a chewable tablet. It's got active ingredients with both Viagra and Cialis. The chewable portion of that is important. If you take a pill and you swallow it, well, you could be affected by the food or the drink that you consumed earlier in the day. That's not going to happen with a chewable tablet. You can be assured that this dosage is going to work for you. You can go there right now, VictoryRx.com. Get prescribed that ED medication. It's VictoryRx.com. Play hard.
Let's run it back with a daily rewind on BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Stewart's American Mortgage. Google the Bagel Loan, featuring 0 fees and 0 closing costs.
Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. If you've missed anything from today's show, be sure to check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you can go to find it. It is all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
If you were listening at the beginning of the show, or you could check it out on the podcast page, you heard Alex get very mad at me for my take on Zack Thompson. My take is very simple. I do not think he should be a part of the plans for the Cardinals rotation going into next year. The reason why I say that, Alex, is because of this. If you allow yourself to get into that line of thinking, I think it prevents you from exploring just how much you can make over this rotation. I want them to add 3 starters in the offseason that are slotted into this rotation above Steven Matz as your number 5 starter. So if Matz is my number 5, there is really no competition there. Going into next year, I want Matthew Liberatore starting out the year at AAA or starting out the year in your bullpen. Can they have 20 different guys that are stretched out going into spring training? Absolutely, they should. You do that every year, right? We saw this with Jordan Hicks. We saw it with Drew Verhagen. A bunch of these guys will come into spring with the ability to throw 3 innings or so. And then some of them will get back down to 1. Others will kind of extend themselves to 6+ innings. And we all know how it works in spring training. But going into next year, you should have 3 starters that you've either signed or traded for that are new additions that are ahead of Zack Thompson, Michaelis, Steven Matz. I would have Matthew Liberatore ahead of him. I would have McGreevy ahead of him. I would have Graceffo ahead of him. I think by mid-season, Tink Hintz will probably be ahead of him on the starting pitching depth chart for me as well. And that's not even getting into any of the guys that they added this year at the trade deadline that could fit into that criteria as well. We've seen Zack Thompson be very good as a bullpen arm in the major leagues. We've seen him be pretty good in that capacity down in the minors. I have never really seen him be good as a starting pitcher other than yesterday. He was awesome yesterday, and he deserves more opportunities as a starter the rest of the way. If he continues doing what he did yesterday, I'll have to rethink where I'm at on this. I would be surprised if that happens because he just did this in the minor leagues, and it never looked like it did yesterday. So I don't have him as part of my plans. I was super happy for him, super happy for the Cardinals, because I think what they've got right now is a potential guy that can replace what Drew Verhagen was for you in those middle innings next year in relief. And that's a nice upgrade to have.
And this is where I just defer with it. I see this as somebody who could still be in consideration, not for your starting rotation, because I agree with you there. You do need to get 3 upgrades over Steven Matz to be in that rotation next year, but I'm not done with Zack Thompson in terms of somebody who could be in my rotation next year, because you were terrible at depth this season in terms of guys that can come up and provide you something when you lose a starting pitcher either to injury or he's been struggling and needs to reset. Zack Thompson should fall into that category. You've been preaching as a Cardinals team to change your model with swing and miss stuff. I get it was a Rockies team, but why not continue to try that for the rest of the season? And if he continues to show swing and miss stuff, then he should still be in consideration for an opportunity next year. Not that he's guaranteed one of those 5 spots, but he should go into spring training still competing for a rotation spot rather than just saying you're in our bullpen.
Maybe this is where maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, Alex, and that's on me. Well, I think he should go into spring stretched out and starting games in spring training. Like, I've got no issues with that because it doesn't hurt you at all. But the odds of him winning a job as a starter are like 0 to me. And so I guess that's where I'm getting a little confused by some of the reaction to what we saw yesterday. Is like, okay, so what does it mean if he is better than what we expected as a starter? Because his role with this team is almost assuredly going to be as a reliever. And if you end up as a reliever in season, they're not going to stretch you back out to be a starter in season. You're going to be a reliever, or they can do what they did this year where they sent him back down to AAA. But there does come a point in time in Zack Thompson's career where next year he's going to be 26 years old. You probably just want him impacting your major league club in whatever way he can. And next year, the best way for him to impact your major league club is almost assuredly going to be coming out of the bullpen. So if you've got a spot start here or there, I want one of the guys that they've got down in AAA taking those starts. Like Michael McGreevy's probably going to be above him in that regard. If you've got 4 starts that are available by a guy going on the IL for 15, 20 days, I'm probably going to have one of those minor league arms coming up to make those starts. I don't know what the scenario is that could present itself where I'm saying to myself, you know what, Zack Thompson's the guy that's going to start a significant number of games for the Cardinals.
I think the
don't know
way
how you get there.
I don't know if it's a significant number, but I think if he continues to start, which again I think he should down the stretch here, I think he can be a guy that going into spring training can be listed as number 6 on the depth chart, because other guys got to prove it first before they can leapfrog Zack Thompson. And again,
how much does he need to show you the rest of the way to get there?
For Thompson?
Yeah, because I think it's a lot.
I think it's a lot for Matthew Liberatore to be even like in the top consideration.
You haven't even seen any of these other guys at the major league level. So how can I put them ahead of him?
That's my thing,
they were better against peer competition than Thompson has been.
But again, this is running on the aspect of he has a successful run as a starter here.
Yeah, if he gets blown up next week, I'll change my tune immediately.
If he looks like Liberatore.
I can't do this after one start where I'm suddenly changing my tune on him.
But it was swing and miss stuff, and that's what people keep preaching, and he showed it. If you give me more in swing and miss stuff, then you're doing more than what Matthew Liberatore has accomplished at this level.
But Liberatore has had starts like we saw yesterday from Zack Thompson.
Yeah, and I don't think he's a starter for them. Like I think he's a guy that you talk about Liberatore like in the bullpen.
Well, and Liberatore's been inconsistent at this level. I haven't seen Thompson out of in a rotation start.
Thompson for me is it's going to be results based, but it's also going to be what the slider looks like. That's the difference between him being a starter and a reliever.
Put him on a routine.
If he has a good slider, he can go into being a depth starter for you next year.
We all agree, start him every 5th day. We all agree there. For Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. We'll all be in better moods tomorrow here on 101 ESPN.